direction of the mews. Lana placed a hand on his sleeve, her heart in her eyes. "Gray, please be careful." "I will." He glanced at Colton. "Are you armed?" The coachman nodded. "Good. Shoot anyone wearing a mask who comes near this coach. Guard her with your life. Do you understand me?" "Yes, my lord." Unable to place the exact location of the shot, he took off at a cautious run through the back lawns of Hadley Gardens, making his way through the shadows and expecting to be waylaid by a masked bandit at any moment. His pulse was racing. He knew what he'd said to Lana, but it was too much of a coincidence. Gray combed his way through the hedges until he came to a courtyard. Houses lined either side of it, and before him were the mews. He could see shadows moving from the lamplight. That had to be it. He was already preparing himself for the worst when he heard a distinctly female voice coming from the depths of the stables. "We were never friends," the voice was saying. Gray frowned. He knew that voice. He edged forward, keeping to the darkness, and peered through a crack in the window. He almost rushed in at the sight that greeted him. Bryn stood in a torn dress, a bruised and bloodied hawk at her side, with Eloise, the Duke's half-sister, pointing the short barrel of a gun toward them. Gray had always suspected Eloise was a bit unstable, but here was the undisputed truth. He inched closer to the stable door, Hawk's raised voice masking his approach. Gray was steps away from her. "Shut up!" Eloise screamed, "or I will drop your precious love like a fly." His heart pounded at the threat to Bryn, but here was his opportunity. Eloise was angry and distracted. Gray slid forward in one quick movement, raising his own pistol to Eloise's temple and divesting her of the gun in the same motion. "I'll take that, thank you." "Gray, how did you find us?" his sister said, locking her wild eyes with his. "Lana told me everything, and Hadley Gardens was my first stop to find you when I heard the shot." With his free hand he managed to relieve Eloise of the gun, but she was too quick and whirled out of his grasp. "Don't hurt her," Hawk said, even as Gray kept his pistol trained on Eloise, where she now crouched behind a saddle stand. "Get Bryn out of here," Hawk added, pushing Bryn toward him. "I will take care of it." "I have Lana in the carriage outside. Come," he told his sister. "No, Archer," Bryn cried out. "I won't leave you." "It's over, love. She can't hurt anyone now." Hawk's face was pained as he walked toward them to kiss Bryn on the temple. His eyes met Gray's, and Gray nodded, handing the Duke his pistol before ushering his sister out of the mews. Gray wrapped her in his cloak, holding her trembling body close, and then scooped her into his arms. He wanted to put as much distance between them and the stables as possible. Lana's eyes were wide when they arrived at the carriage, and Gray tucked Bryn into the seat beside her. As Gray made her more comfortable, Bryn explained what had transpired, that Eloise had been in league with the masked bandit. "Did Eloise hurt you?" he asked Bryn, anger rising in him at the bruised welt on her temple. "I'm fine," she whispered. "Hawk can take care of himself, Bryn," Gray assured her. He was floored by the naked emotion on his sister's face. He hadn't believed that she loved the man, but he knew it now. Her feelings for him were written all over her, as Hawk's had been in the mews. Gray's eyes met Lana's over Bryn's head, and something terrifying took him in its grasp. He couldn't fathom what he would do if anything happened to either of the two women sitting across from him. If it had been Lana standing at the end of a gun, he would have moved heaven and earth to protect her, thrown himself in front of the bullet if he had to. Gray closed his eyes. There it was, the simple and irrefutable fact. He loved her. Chapter 22. The next handful of days unfolded at a slug's pace, and yet somehow also like a summer tempest. Lana did not leave her mistress's side as they prepared for their retreat from London. It had been decided quickly that Lord and Lady Dinsmore and Lady Brianon could not remain in town after Lady Eloise's funeral. Not only would they be made to weather the scrutiny revolving around Lady Eloise's death and that of the masked marauder in the Hadley Gardens mews, but also the very public and very humiliating retraction of Archer and Bryn's betrothal in the Times. Bryn had shrugged it off. Lana knew the engagement had been a farce, intended only to protect Archer from being considered a suspect. But that night in the mews, when a second gunshot had split the night, Bryn's fear that Archer had been killed had nearly driven her to hysteria. Gray had needed to restrain her from rushing back into the mews, the light of a building fire flickering inside. And when Archer had finally emerged, shouting for Gray's help to extinguish the flames that Eloise had set, Bryn had sobbed with relief. She loved Archer, but she was not going to marry him. Lana understood entirely and shared in the solemn pall that hung over Bishop House the next few days. As she folded and wrapped each article of clothing, every accessory, every shoe, Lana thought of what had happened at that indecent gaming hell, on that decadent purple couch, underneath the most exasperatingly handsome and charming man she had ever known. At that moment Bryn swept into the room from the adjoining bath-chamber, where Mary had been assisting her in her morning ablutions, and jerked Lana from her heated thoughts. Lana ducked her head, hoping to hide her flushed cheeks, but of course that did not escape Bryn's notice. "Is something amiss, Lana? You haven't been yourself lately." Bryn shook her head. "Not that any of us are, but you do seem distracted." "Oh, it's nothing," Lana imagined herself answering. "I simply can't stop thinking about how your brother made love to me in a gaming hell a few days ago." Lana nearly smiled at how ridiculous and wrong it all sounded, and yet being with Gray hadn't felt wrong at all. He'd said something to her when she'd taken in the sight of his impressive and a bit alarming length with a shiver of fear. Our bodies are meant for this. They were meant to come together, to share in one another. They had, and it had been an exquisite union. Now she couldn't get the notion that her body had been meant for his, and his body for hers, out of her mind. She had given herself to him, her body, her trust, and, though she felt like a fool even thinking it, her heart. She didn't regret a moment of their time at the Cock and the Crown. She didn't regret any moment with Gray at all, come to think of it. The only thing she regretted was not being able to stop herself from falling in love with him. She was in love with Gray, and it was going to be a disaster. Not that she could tell Lady Briannan any of this. Mary curtsied and took her leave while Lana put aside the folding. She then retrieved a comb and the hot iron for her mistress's hair. "Don't trouble yourself, my lady. I'm sure I'm just a little shaky from my interview with Mr. Thompson yesterday." Bryn, Archer, Gray, Lana and Colton had all been interviewed, but Mr. Thompson, the Bow Street inquiry agent, had felt he could press Lana and Colton, as servants, more than once with questions where he could not with the others. "That atrocious man," Bryn grumbled, sitting in her chair before the vanity mirror. "When Gray heard he'd been in the kitchens asking you more questions, he nearly boiled over." Gray. Lana had seen him in passing, but they had not been given the opportunity to be alone or talk. "Did he?" she asked. Then, with a forced shrug, added, "I suppose Lord Northridge only wanted to be sure I didn't stray from the story." Bryn peered at Lana in the mirror's reflection. "I feel terrible about asking you to lie, Lana." "Do not be silly," she replied. "It was necessary to protect Lady Eloise's reputation." In the rushed moments between Archer and Gray extinguishing the flames in the mews and the arrival of the constable, the four of them had concocted a timeline of events that would shield Eloise's memory from being stained. As it now stood, the masked marauder had set upon the carriage taking Gray, Bryn and Lana to the Kensington ball. Archer had chanced upon the attack, and they had all been forced back to the Hadley Gardens mews. There they'd been bound and gagged while the bandits scoured the main home for the loot he'd had to leave behind on his last visit, the visit where he had shot and killed the Duke of Bradburn. Eloise, they all agreed to say, had interrupted the bandit in the mews. She had been shot, while Gray had wrestled free of his restraints, gotten a hold of the bandit's second pistol, and then shot the bandit. A lit candle, they agreed, had set the stable on fire. Lana was nearly finished with Bryn's hair. She was leaving to call upon Lady Cordelia, though Lana knew she would rather stay in and brood. "You are wonderful, Lana, truly. We are so lucky to have you with us." She smiled, though it was shaky. "I am the lucky one, my lady." "Are you disappointed to be leaving London so soon?" Bryn asked as Lana released a lock of her mistress's hair from its coil around the hot iron. It bounced free and perfect next to Bryn's ear. "Not at all, my lady," Lana replied, hoping her anxiousness to be gone from town had not sounded as apparent to her as it did to Lana. She wanted to be anywhere Victor was not. It had been well over a week since she'd last heard from Lord Langlevitt, and she'd started to seriously consider that something might have happened to him. It was all her fault. If he'd been harmed in any way in his attempts to clear her name and protect her and Irina, she would never forgive herself. Adding to her frazzled worry was the fact that Gray's man had not yet sent word or returned from his trip up to Cumbria to protect Irina from the Frenchmen her uncle had deployed. It would have taken 4 days, 5 at the most, to reach the Langlevitt estate. Not knowing what was happening was maddening. At the very least, Essex would be closer to Cumbria. "The funeral service is tomorrow," Bryn said, though needlessly, as Lana tied her stays and helped her into a pale green muslin day dress. The entire household had been riding the swell of a black wave toward the event all week. "Mamma wishes to depart for Ferndale immediately after." "Yes, my lady." Bryn sighed. "I don't know why Mamma thinks both you and Mary need to be attached to me every single second. I'm perfectly fine. I'm not going to faint at the funeral or expire at the sight of His Grace." Her voice shook slightly on the last, but she tossed her head. "It's all well and good that the farce is over with. Now the Duke can move on with his life, and me with mine." Lana didn't answer, but she knew exactly why Lady Dinsmore wanted her at her daughter's side. Despite the fetching hairstyle and lovely gown, the gauntness of Bryn's face spoke volumes, as did the broken heart she tried so valiantly to conceal. Lana's heart wept when she saw Bryn's red-rimmed eyes each morning, but there was little she could do other than be there for whatever Bryn needed, which at the moment she insisted was nothing. Lana couldn't imagine what Bryn had gone through, not knowing whether she was going to live or die, losing everything she loved in one fell swoop. It made her stomach clench painfully, because all she could think about was Irina, and what would happen if she ever lost her. The horrific events last week had been an epiphany. She had to make sure her sister was safe no matter what. Irina had to come first, above all else. "After the funeral, I should like you to go to Ferndale with the rest of the staff beforehand," Bryn was saying. "There is no need for you to ride with me to Essex, and I would hate to have you perched on the driver's seat with Beckett the whole time. Mary will do in your stead, and I think she would not mind a little time with Beckett." Lana set the iron down in a porcelain bowl to cool. She hadn't expected the sensation of relief that filled her just then. Not for the fact that she would be able to ride inside a carriage with other servants, but that she would be escaping London one day sooner than anticipated. "Thank you, my lady," she said, but Bryn touched Lana's arm as she drew away to remove the bowl and iron. "All will be well, Lana. You'll see," she said earnestly. "I know you worry for me, but it's better this way, truly." Her heart aching, Lana curtsied. "If you say so, my lady." Bryn departed a few moments later, and Lana made her way below stairs. The kitchens were being scoured and the perishables put on ice and crated for the journey back to Essex. As much as Mrs. Braxton liked to complain about the unexpected departure back to Ferndale, Lana knew she was happy to be rushing around, clucking like a hen. Mrs. Frommer, on the other hand, wore her usual pinched expression as she barked orders to the scullery maids. Avoiding the housekeeper, Lana slipped through the commotion, wanting only to sit and not think, not worry. It wasn't to be. She sought a brief respite on the bottom step of the servants' staircase. She couldn't stop thinking about Irina, and about Gray, about what she wanted to do, and what she had to do, As much as she cared for him, Lana knew they had no future together. He needed to be with his daughter and his family, and she needed to be with hers. She had to end it with him, and the sooner she did so, the better it would be for everyone. Suddenly Lana understood why Bryn insisted on being so strong through the cancellation of the banns. The Duke needed to move on with his life, just as Grey did. And as it stood, Lana was in the way. Grey had a future. He was the heir to an earldom. People would depend on him. Whatever misguided sense of honour he felt for her was simply that, misguided. She would not take him away from his family and all that he loved. Lana rested her head on the panelled wall of the narrow staircase and stifled a gut-wrenching sob. The church for Lady Eloise's funeral service was not overly full, Lana noted. From the little Bryn had told her about the Duke's reclusive sister, she did not have many acquaintances, so it was mostly family in attendance. A handful of people, if that, filled only the first 3 pews. Curious, Lana glanced around from where she sat, farther back, near the end of the 6th pew. She recognized Lady Cordelia as well as a few familiar faces she'd seen in and around Bishop House, including Lord Thorndale with a petite woman Lana expected must be his wife. It was certainly not the number of people who had turned out en masse for the late Duke of Bradburn's funeral. Then again, he'd been well loved. Lady Eloise had been tolerated as his eccentric bye-blow. Lady Dinsmore had requested Lana stay close at hand during the service, in case Bryn took a turn for the worse. Lana had seen no reason why Victor would attend the funeral services, so she had gone without much worry. However, Bryn seemed fine, if quieter than usual. But Lana suspected that had to do with seeing His Grace, the Duke of Bradburn. Lana couldn't help noticing the Duke's hard, implacable expression, though it had softened imperceptibly when he'd greeted Bryn. Even now he sent her surreptitious glances from time to time. Despite what Bryn had said about her betrothal being a farce, it was obvious that the Duke cared about her. Perhaps, when everything settled, they could still have a chance together. Lana wished very much for her mistress to be happy. Her gaze slid to the man sitting at the end of the 2nd pew, and her heart stuttered. Grey had not wanted to attend the service, which was no surprise given the truth of what Lady Eloise had done. He had only come under duress from Lady Dinsmore, and to support his sister in her hour of need. His opinion of Bradburn had changed too, but Lana suspected that had to do with what had happened in the mews when the Duke had risked his life in order to protect Bryn. She had missed seeing Grey these past few days. He'd accompanied the Coopers from Kentish Town back to Essex, to see Sophia safely returned to Breckenham. Lana did not fault him at all for wanting to see his daughter after the ordeal in the Hadley Garden mews. It was the heart of why she needed to focus all her energy on Irina. Lord Bradburn had lost his sister so unexpectedly, so violently. The fear of losing Irina the way the Duke had was entirely mind-numbing, and it wasn't completely out of the realm of possibility. With the threat of Victor on their heels, and Langlevitt gone now for well over a week, Lana felt powerless. She couldn't help feeling that a noose was cinching tighter and tighter about both their necks, urging them into a looming trap that they would not be able to escape. She had to do something. She had to get to her sister. If Langlevitt's cryptographer contact had fallen through, or, heaven forbid, if something had happened to the Earl himself, then she and Irina would have to run. There would be no hope for deciphering the letters, and no one to be their ally. She and Irina would always have to stay one step ahead of the Baron and their uncle. Perhaps she would take Irina to Egypt or India, or even the Americas. It would be a new start for both of them, and far enough away that they would be safe. The only problem would be Grey. He wouldn't let her go, not willingly. If he followed, if he tried to come with her and Irina, she would be putting him in danger, and she would never want him to leave his family for her. She swallowed past the boulder-sized lump in her throat. She had but one course of action. She would have to make him let her go. Out of the corner of her eye, Lana drank in the sight of him, committing the shape of his face to memory. She devoured the image of his proud brow, graced with pale blonde eyebrows. Her breath caught at his full lips, so perfect in profile, as were his straight nose and the strong jaw that framed them. She'd dreamed of that face for 1,000 nights, and she'd savour it now for the nights to come. In that same moment, as if sensing her stare, Gray shifted his head a fraction to the left. His blue gaze drilled into hers. She felt that look to the tips of her toes. It mirrored everything she was feeling and more. Tearing her eyes away with a harsh breath, Lana focused on the closing moments of the service, folding her trembling hands in her lap. The blatant yearning on Gray's face would do nothing to change her course. She couldn't afford to let it, for Irina's sake, for his too. Steeling herself, Lana vowed to tell him her decision as soon as she could. It turned out that soon came far sooner than she'd expected. As Lady and Lord Dinsmore ushered Bryn through the church and out the door to their waiting carriage, Lana stayed near her pew. Once the rest of the lords and ladies had left, she would follow in a coach with Lady Dinsmore's maid, who had also accompanied the family. Lady Dinsmore was nothing if not prepared. As Lana approached the church doors, however, a hand shot out from a shadowed alcove and wrapped around her elbow. She was drawn forcibly into the alcove, where carved stone steps led up to a turret. Warm fingers clamped over her lips, trapping the scream billowing there. "Hush, Lana. It's only me." Gray. "My lord, what are you doing?" He buried his face in her hair, his arms going around her. God, it was torture sitting there watching you, not being beside you. You have no idea. Conscious of the people just on the other side of the archway, Lana tried to push them both deeper into the alcove, behind the twisting stone stairs. "Stop, someone will see." "I don't care." His lips caressed her forehead, her cheeks, her nose, while his scent spiraled around her like another, less tangible embrace. Her body thrummed at his touch, wanting to fold into his, to take strength from him. But Lana knew that if she gave in, all would be lost. She would be lost. "Gray, please." Lana's fingers curled into fists against his jacket, and she shoved away from him with all her waning strength. It was futile. He didn't budge. "I don't care who sees us, Lana." His warm lips grazed her ear, making her knees weaken as they traced a path down her jaw. "Let them look, let them stare. It's you I want." "I care," Lana said, turning her face away from his meandering lips. If he kissed her, she would not be able to think, much less do what she meant to. And if she had to do it here, so be it. "Please, Lord Northridge." A frown puckered his brow, but the formal address made him pause. "Lord Northridge? You must stop. This can't go on." Gray finally took a step in reverse, though he was still touching her. He looked at her with a pointed, uncertain expression. Lana forced herself to hold his gaze, though she longed to look away. She didn't want to hurt him, but she felt something closing in on her, an inescapable truth, one that she had been ignoring every single time she saw Gray, spoke to him, kissed him, given herself to him. She had been living a lie for the last 8 months, and everyone she'd met during that time had been caught up in the tangles of it. Even him, especially him. Their entire relationship had been built on lies and half-truths, because of her. Lana fought the flush creeping up into her cheeks, but he still saw it. "It is too late to stop, Lana," he said evenly, and just like that, she was picturing him above her on that velvet couch, his body joining hers, claiming her in every way. She shook her head. "You know as well as I that there is no future for us." And if Lord Langlevitt did not return from his meeting with the cryptographer, if things took a turn for the worse, she had to be prepared to leave England with Irina, leave without the threat of Gray coming after her. Inhaling deeply, she took a half-step back until her shoulders were pressed into the stone wall, but it was enough for his hands to fall away. Silence hummed between them, heavy and fraught. "I can't do this any more," she said. "What exactly?" His voice was guarded, but Lana heard the thread of hurt beneath it. She pressed forward, strengthening her resolve.
Us, we do not belong together. You are a lord, and I am a maid.
He eyed her, a muscle along his jaw tensing.
We've already been through this. Let the rest of the blasted ton think what they will. I don't care. All I care about is you, Lana.
That's just the problem. You should care, she said gently. You should care for Sophia's sake, and for your family's, for Bryn's.
Gray shook his head, his resolve showing in the rigid line of his shoulders, but he leaned forward to gently grasp her elbows. I will not allow other people's opinions to rule my heart, or my decisions. I allowed it once, with Sophia, yes, because you knew there was no other way. You would have been skewered, your family scandalized. You thought of them first then, and you should think of them now.
I am, he muttered.
I do think of them.
Lana steeled herself for what had to come, for the pain she would cause him. But it had to be done.
Do you, Gray?
She asked pointedly.
When you leave Sophia in the care of strangers, are you truly thinking of her well-being? When you try to protect yourself at her expense, are you thinking of her, or are you just hiding from responsibility?
His mouth parted on a soundless exhale, as if she'd just knocked the wind out of him.
That's not fair. Sadly, my lord, life isn't fair, but we cope as well as we are able. My sister needs me, and your daughter needs her father. Your family needs you.
And you don't? He asked.
No.
She shook her head, her heart breaking into tiny pieces at the betrayed look in his eyes.
You don't even know me, Gray. I have a sister and a family in Russia. That is where I belong, not here, and not with you. I was a passing flirtation, nothing more. You have to marry to your station, and I have to return to my life. We must say goodbye.
Lana, why are you doing this? He asked softly.
Is it because you're afraid? I'm afraid, too, but we can make this work. You're right, I need to take responsibility to be a better man. I can make this work, with Sophia, with you, with my family. Just let me try, please. That's all I'm asking. One chance.
Oh, God. He was begging, pleading. Gray's hands stroked hers, sliding up her arms and pulling her toward him. She could barely steel herself against the look in his eyes as it was. Lana grew desperate, swallowing the battered joy rising like a geyser in her chest. She should have known he would never give up that easily. Her eyes burned with unshed tears, but Lana held on to her fading composure with every shred of strength she had left. Irina, she reminded herself. Irina was the only person who mattered. She had to make him hate her. Lana's heart would mend, and so would Gray's. The horrendous lie she was about to speak nearly choked her, but she forced it out. I can't. I have to tell you something. Before we left Russia, my uncle arranged for my hand in marriage to a local boy. It was as if all the air was sucked out of the room. Her chest rose and fell with frantic, gasping breaths, but Gray only stared at her, his eyes disbelieving, agonized. Marriage, he repeated, his voice flat. To a local boy.
Yes.
He took a breath. You are betrothed? Lana nodded, unable to speak.
Then why did you...
He raised his chin, fury cresting in his injured glare.
Why in hell did you give yourself to me at the Crown?
She flinched, her eyes drifting from his as she dug deep, to the layers of cool reserve drilled into her from birth, the ability to hold one's composure no matter what. For the first time in months, she reached for the hidden princess buried underneath all the layers of the servant.
I had heard so many rumors about your prowess in the bedroom. Can you fault me for being curious?
Lana was grateful for the cool tones of her voice that conveyed the despicable words, meant to flay him to the bone. They succeeded. Gray released her elbows, and they dropped to her sides, heavy as lead. He stared at her,
stunned disbelief warring with confusion in his eyes. She delivered the final blow with an insouciant shrug of her shoulders. "What is it Lady Dinsmore always says? A girl can't do better than to catch a duke. Well, I didn't catch a duke, but I had a part of you, and you didn't disappoint, Lord Northridge. You, a viscount, an English lord, the heir to an earldom. In truth, you were a pleasant novelty for a mere maid like me." "You're lying," he whispered. Lana strained to meet his stare. She had to make him believe, even if it gouged out her heart. "I am not," she said, keeping her voice calm and steady. "I only wish I had made myself plain before now. Once Lord Langlevitt helps me bring Zakharov and Count Volkonsky to justice, I plan to return to Russia with my sister and marry the one of my uncle's choosing. I have no desire to stay here in England, with you or any man of my acquaintance." More lies. Lies built upon lies, an entire fortress of them. She held herself entirely still, her expression cast of stone. One flicker of emotion, and she would crumble. A small, quiet part of her screamed for Grey not to believe her, to argue and force her to admit the truth, to dispute every ugly word trespassing her lips and violating her heart. But she had been too exact, too perfect in her cold, ruthless performance. "Any man of your acquaintance," he said dully. "I understand now." Lana longed to correct him, that he was, the only man, but she couldn't lay it all to waste now. She had to cut him loose for good. "Perhaps I am more like Mariana than we both knew." A muscle flexed in his cheek, and Grey stepped to the side, his eyes falling away from hers. His lips were parted, as if he wanted to say something. He licked them and then flared his nostrils, as a sweep of pain and humiliated anger transformed his features. "Of course. How lucky am I to have been your entertaining diversion, while Langlevitt fixed all of your problems. Go home, then, now that you know what it is to lie with a lord. Go marry your pauper boy." He flexed his hands into fists and brushed past her, pausing only to add, "You will be forgotten in a fortnight." He stalked out of the alcove, and Lana's heart went with him, stretching and ripping, completely destroyed. She closed her eyes and braced herself against the cold, twisting stone stairwell. God, he hated her now, but she had done what she'd needed to do. He would not come for her. He would stay where he was needed, with Bryn and Sophia and his family. He would stay safe. Unlike what Grey had promised her, she would not forget him in a fortnight. She would never forget him, never stop loving him. How absurd, how cruel, that this had been the only way she could show it. Chapter 23. Perhaps I am more like Mariana than we both knew. They were the most damning words he'd ever heard. Worse, because Grey had never thought to even compare the two women. Their only commonality had been their humble origins. But he'd been wrong. Lana, as it turned out, was far worse than Mariana had ever been. At least Mariana had been truthful about not wanting Sophia. Lana was a liar, a schemer, a fraud. She had hurt him worse than Mariana ever had. "That will do, my lord," Harrison said with a satisfied nod at his handiwork. Grey scrubbed a hand over his face as his valet finished the last touches on his cravat, completing the intricate knot with a diamond stick-pin. The man in the looking-glass looked exactly like the man from the night before. Pressed evening clothes, clean-shaven jaw, not a strand of blonde hair out of place. He looked like his normal self. The arrogant aristocrat without a care in the world, which was what he intended. "Thank you, Harrison. Please send for my carriage." "Already done, my lord. Rogers is out front." Descending the staircase, Grey entered the waiting coach and sat back on the velvet squabs. He did not want to go out, but he would go insane if he remained another minute within the empty walls of Bishop House. The rest of his family had departed for Essex days before, leaving him with Harrison, a cookmaid, a footman, and his driver. The only reprieve had been that Bryn had taken her maid with her. Gray didn't know if his heart could handle the sight of her, which was why he'd chosen to remain in London, to clear his head. It hadn't helped a whit. She haunted him everywhere he turned. He couldn't play a hand of cards without thinking about her, sprawled on that sofa at the Crown. He couldn't go into a garden without smelling her fragrance. Hell, he couldn't even close his eyes without seeing her face. So, tonight, he was trying something different. He would attempt to replace her face with another. Not a courtesan. He'd tried that, but couldn't bring himself to do it, not after years of celibacy that he'd only broken with Lana. No, he'd replace her with something more. Be responsible, as she'd levelled at him, marry to his station, do his duty. A wife would do nicely. The King's Theatre was crowded, glittering under the flickering gaslights. He'd invited Lady Cordelia Vandermeer to his private box at the opera, choosing it for its exposure. It seemed like all the young ladies he was acquainted with longed for the chance to be seen at the opera with a prospective beau. And if he remembered something Bryn had once said, the opera was one of Lady Cordelia's favourite pastimes. But as he walked through the crowded foyer of the King's Theatre, the thought of sitting in an enclosed box with only the young lady and Mozart's Don Giovanni for company made him feel ill. Not that he was anything like Don Giovanni, a notorious libertine and seducer of women, but the subject matter felt too close for comfort. He couldn't help noticing the fact that the last woman of his intimate acquaintance had been promised to another, and he had taken her innocence. He clenched his jaw. He hadn't taken anything that hadn't willingly been given. Cordelia had arrived with her parents and stood at the far end of the hall. He grasped a glass of whiskey from a nearby footman and drank it in one gulp. For fortitude. Determinedly, Gray made his way toward the lady and her parents, even though his feet wanted to flee in the opposite direction. He stopped to converse with a few people he knew, though it felt as if he were in some sort of waking dream, like his body was a wooden puppet with someone else controlling the strings. "Lord Vandermeer, Countess," he said with a short bow to her parents, before taking Cordelia's gloved fingers in his palm and pressing his lips to the silk. "Lady Cordelia, how lovely you look." "Lord Northridge, what a kind thing to say," she said graciously, and inclined her neck as her parents offered their greetings and pleasantries. His smile felt plastered on, but Gray had to admit Cordelia looked beautiful. The ice-blue gown set off her figure to perfection. Her skin glowed with radiant health, and her flaxen curls framed sparkling eyes the same colour as her dress. On the surface she was everything he should want, cultured, poised, beautiful, and blue-blooded. She would make an excellent match. His mother would be ecstatic, but Gray felt nothing but hollowness in the pit of his stomach as he escorted her to his private box. Her parents went to theirs, but Cordelia's quiet chaperone, the same young woman who'd been with her in front of White's, trailed a few steps behind them and sat unobtrusively in the corner once they arrived. Her presence, dictated by society, was a necessity. "I must admit, Lord Northridge," Cordelia said, flicking open her fan, "I was surprised when you called upon me the other afternoon." "Why is that?" She inclined her head. "I had heard the rest of your family left for Essex shortly after Lady Eloise's funeral, and I suppose I expected you to return as well." "I had business in London." She smiled from behind the pleats of her fan. "Of course." Their conversation faded into silence as the first act began, but as the opera wore on, Gray found that he couldn't concentrate. He shifted in his seat, his knees shaking with restless energy. His eyes swept to the woman at his side, and he saw, to his surprise, that she was looking at him instead of the stage. He arched an eyebrow, uncomfortable at the odd, incisive look in her eyes. She flicked her fan open again. "You don't enjoy the opera?" "Not particularly," he admitted. "Then why did you ask me?" "Because it is what you like." The corner of her mouth tipped upward into a half-smile as she stifled a laugh. "We have known each other for years, Lord Northridge, and never once have you cared a hoot for what I like. What has changed?" Surprised, Grey stared at her. She had never struck him as anything less than icy, but now he saw something else, a deep intelligence and a sly humour. He appreciated her bluntness and answered equally so. "I suppose it is time I chose a wife." A faint flush shimmered over her cheekbones, her fan gliding into motion. "Though I am flattered, what makes you think I would be interested in such a suit?" Grey blinked. "Isn't that what all young women want?" "Not all women, Lord Northridge." She surprised him again, but this time something in her voice tugged at him. It contained wistfulness, a resignation to a fate not wished for. He recognized the feeling intimately, and Grey was curious to know what she meant. He turned to face her. "And what is it that you want?" She angled her head toward the stage and took her time before answering. "I wish for freedom." "If you marry the right man, you'll have it," he said, frowning. Her laugh was hollow. "Come now, Lord Northridge, surely you don't believe that? I mean freedom from this." She waved a gloved hand, her voice low and intense. "From expectation, from what should be done. Who says I must marry?" He tented a slow eyebrow. "You don't wish to?" "Not if I can help it. How do you think I've managed to stay free for 3 full seasons?" Cordelia laughed. "I am as skilled at avoiding unwanted suits as I am at attracting them." "And your parents?" he asked, starting to realize that her icy demeanor had been an act. "They only want for my happiness. My father married a governess, after all, though it's remarkable how well the ton chooses what it wants to remember." Grey sat back in his chair. Had he known that Lady Vandermeer had been a governess? He couldn't recall any gossip of that nature, though it would have been 20 years ago. "Who says I must be a dutiful wife to some lord?" Cordelia's slender shoulders rose in a shrug. "Become a broodmare for his heirs. I wish freedom from it all, to be who I want, to love whom I want." Grey's eyes narrowed at her. "Love," he repeated. "The thing we live for, the one we breathe for." Almost as if she hadn't meant to, her eyes flicked over her shoulder to the woman seated in the corner of his opera box. The chaperone met Cordelia's eyes only briefly, but it was long enough. Grey drew in a clipped breath. He shook his head, convinced he had misinterpreted the look of longing, but then Cordelia smiled and tipped her head to the side. "We want who we want." Grey couldn't help it. He laughed. For the first time in days he laughed. She, the icy, unflappable, prim and proper Lady Cordelia Vandermeer, had shocked him. "You are right," he agreed. She leaned toward him, her eyes sparkling. "And it's evident, Lord Northridge, that you do not want me." Grey went silent and then swallowed, his eyes returning to the final act unfolding on stage. "You are right, but what if the young lady in question is promised to another? Do you care for each other?" His breath stalled at the blunt question. He'd thought they had, but Lana had well and truly shattered that illusion. Grey flinched at the biting recollection of her words, but then he took a breath and pushed past the dull ache to recall her face, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, the unhidden agony in them. He'd been so consumed with his own that he hadn't seen hers. He knew what had happened in the mews had affected her greatly, and that she worried for her sister. Grey frowned. Had she said what she had out of some skewed notion of protecting him? Was there even a man waiting for her, or had she said it all to push him away, to protect him? Oh, Lana. "Yes," he answered in a hoarse voice. "I think so." Cordelia smiled at him. "Then why are you here courting me? Go, Lord Northridge, find happiness. There is no cost too great to pay. Trust me on that." His chest felt tight as he stood and bent to kiss her hand. "Thank you." "Think nothing of it, my lord," she replied with an airy wave. "After all, we free-spirited souls need to stick together. If there is ever anything I can do for you, Lady Cordelia, please do not hesitate to ask," Grey said, and meant it.
I shall take my leave. My apologies for not seeing you home. Should I escort you back to your parents?" Cordelia hid a secret smile behind her fan. "I think I shall stay here a few minutes more, if that suits you, Lord Northridge. Precious few moments like these are not to be wasted." "Please, stay as long as you like." Grey left the box, drawing the curtains closed behind him. The sound of soft laughter reached his ears through it, but he had other things on his mind, his own happiness, as it were. With renewed purpose he strode down the plush-carpeted steps to his waiting carriage, but was halted from climbing into it by a man shouting, "My lord! Lord Northridge!" Surprised, Grey turned to see Croydon, the man he'd hired to keep an eye on Zakharov, riding toward him. Grey frowned. Croydon was grimy and covered in filth. What looked like globs of crusted blood stuck to his face and clothing. "What happened to you?" "The Baron, my lord," the man wheezed, sliding in a bone-weary heap from the saddle and clutching his middle. "Caught me and young Tommy tailing him. Thrashed me to within an inch. Dumped me in the river and left me for dead, he did." Grey felt his insides turn to ice as he gripped the man's shoulder. He knew all too well what a brute like Zakharov was capable of. "Do you know where the Baron is now, Croydon? Is he still in London?" "No, my lord." Croydon shook his head. "Tommy followed him. North. His carriage rode north." The darkening clouds closing in on Ferndale worried Lana. She'd helped Bryn prepare for an early evening ride less than a quarter-hour before, and by the looks of it, her mistress would be caught in a downpour soon. Lana sat upon a chair just beyond the kitchen entrance, a bucket of soapy water at her feet. The cool breeze had been too delicious to pass up, so she had thrown on her black cloak to shield against the chilled air, and taken the bit of laundry she had for Bryn outdoors. She scrubbed a few spots of dark red wine from the left half of a pair of delicate kidskin gloves, hoping to lift the stain. Lana's mind wandered, her scrubbing intensifying as it touched on everything she did not wish to think about. Her sister, and whether or not the Frenchman, or even Grey's hired man, had reached her in Cumbria. Lord Langlevitt, and the now undeniable knowledge that something untoward had happened to him. There could be no other reason for his prolonged absence. Her uncle and Victor's whereabouts were up in the air as well, now that Lana had been in Essex for nearly a week. And Grey. She thought of Grey, and winced at the cruel things she'd said to him, the lies she'd uttered in order to push him away and keep him safe. The pain of it still pricked her soul whenever she remembered the look in his eyes as she'd torn out his heart, and her own. "Lady Lana." She stopped her scrubbing and looked up. James, the footman, was approaching her chair, which she'd dragged out from the kitchen and placed in the swaying grass. The breeze had kicked up a notch, and even the winter cloak she wore felt insufficient against the raw cold. James held out a slim letter. "This just arrived for you." No one sent her letters. No one except the Earl of Langlevitt. With her breath caught in her throat, her pulse pounding with hope, she took the letter. She let out a near sob of relief when she saw the waxed seal with the usual jumping hair. "Is anything wrong?" James asked, frowning with worry. Lana set the glove down and jumped to her feet. "Oh no, nothing at all," she said, and thanking him, darted inside the kitchen. She hurried toward a back corridor and dipped into the still-room. It smelled of herbs, dried fruit, and the sharp scent of liqueur, but Lana paid no attention to that as she ripped the letter from the envelope. She instantly recognized the Earl's hand, though the contents were not coded. "Deepest apologies on my absence. Followed a lead to Cumbria after finding my cryptographer contact dead. Did not wish to alarm you. No choice in matter now. Your sister has been taken. On my way to Essex. Reason to believe that is their destination. You are in danger. You must remain in London. Entrench. Request Lord Northridge's help. He will give it, I am sure. Trust me to retrieve your sister. Your servant, as always, L." The edges of the parchment crumpled in her hand. Her arms shook,
A hard, hot sob lodged in her throat. Irina. The Frenchman had succeeded. He'd taken her. After so many days of only imagining the worst, it had come to pass. Lana let out a whimper and squeezed her eyes shut. Tears stung them, her heart shuddering madly in her chest. She'd failed her sister. She'd said she would protect her, and she hadn't. No, she'd been tucked away in London and Essex, doing Lady Briannon's hair, and falling in love with a man she had no right loving in the first place. Love. She loved her sister, and she needed to get to her. Langlevitt didn't know what had happened, clearly. The letter was dated 4 days prior, first sent to Bishop House, then redirected to Essex. He hadn't known Eloise had died. He had no idea she and the family had returned to Ferndale, though if he'd been on his way to Essex 4 days ago, he had likely arrived. She left the still-room, her pulse a staggered beat, her mind whirling. Where had Lana been when Irina had been attacked and stolen? Swinging in the Cooper's backyard? Dreaming of an idyllic life with Gray and his daughter? Lana felt so guilty, so wrong, and angry. Victor would not harm her. Lana wouldn't let him. Langlevitt had advised staying in London and seeking out Gray's help, but it was too late for that. She was already in Essex, and she most certainly couldn't go to Gray now, not after what she'd said to him after Eloise's funeral. She knew he'd remained behind because of her, and she'd been grateful for it. She'd been happy to not be tortured by his presence at every turn. But now Lana couldn't help but wish he were here. He would know exactly what to do, what to say. But Gray was gone. And now, so was Irina. As she climbed the servants' staircase, her tears fell hot and fast, and she swiped at them furiously. What good would they do for Irina? Tears, like hopeless wishes, were useless. Lana reached her room in the attics and threw off her cloak. She placed Langlevitt's letter in a ceramic wash-basin, and, striking a match, lit it on fire. As Lana watched it burn to cinders, she dried her eyes and tried to steady her breathing. The knot of worry that had settled in Lana's stomach grew heavier with each passing moment. The Earl had ordered her to stay put. It was something she could not do. His Essex home, Hartstone, was only a 15-minute ride from Ferndale. With the skies about to unleash a torrent of rain, Bryn would most likely be returning from her outing very soon. Lana knew she should stay at Ferndale. It was her duty to see to her mistress. However, those rules weighed nothing compared to the duty Lana felt right then to her sister. She could no longer stay where she was, hiding and waiting. Lana made up her mind. She would see if the Earl was in residence at Hartstone. At least it would be something to do. Resolute, she forewent her heavy woolen black cloak and donned her green cape, a lighter material and better suited for both rain and a fast ride through the countryside. She then took a circuitous route to the stables in order to arrive there unseen. Percival was in the stables tending to the horses. He thought nothing of Lana's request to take one of the lesser mounts out, though he did express concern about the coming storm. "Just a short ride," she told him, making sure to smile widely and flutter her lashes a bit. She felt like a fool, but it was worth it. "You know my skill, Percy," she added with a playful tap to his shoulder. The boy's ears went pink, and he helped her saddle the bay. Within minutes, Lana was streaking down Ferndale's Lane, through the village of Breckenham and onward to Langlevitt's estate. Anything at all could have happened in the 4 days since he'd written Lana. She prayed he had Irina with him, and that the Frenchman her uncle and Victor had hired was now in custody, or dead. It was a heartless thought, but yes, she wanted the man dead. She wanted any person who threatened her sister's safety dead. I should have been there to protect her. It was the thought that would not quit playing in her mind as she rode, the first drops of rain striking her heated cheeks. Of course she knew nothing could be reversed. She'd thought she was doing the right thing, the best thing for them, when she'd taken a position as lady's maid. Hartstone was not as large as Ferndale, but it was stately just the same. Its many windows were dark, and with the storm eclipsing the last bit of sunlight in the sky, the house looked eerie. She would have believed it was vacant, had there not been a few windows along the ground level dimly lit by firelight. She turned up the long, straight drive to the front courtyard. It was indecent, really, a servant showing up unannounced at this time of night. But Lana could not have cared less. What did it matter now? Her secrets were crumbling out from underneath her. If they had found Irina, it was only a matter of time before they found her, too. She tied her mount off on one of the posts and went straight to the front door. Her pounding knock was answered almost immediately by none other than the Earl himself. He stared at her, a clicking sound coming from behind his back where he held his arm hidden. When he brought his hand into view, she saw a pistol. "What the devil are you doing here?" he hissed, grabbing her elbow and pulling her inside the foyer. "Where is Irina?" she asked, her eyes jumping to the stairs and balustrade above the foyer. She saw no one, heard no one. The place was utterly dark, except for a receiving room to the right. In there she saw the flickers of a fire in the hearth. "I told you to stay in London," he said, ignoring her question. She supposed it was only fair. She'd ignored his after all. "I was already in Ferndale when I received your note. We left London shortly after." She broke off and shook her head, not wanting to explain about Lord and Lady Dinsmore's early departure from London. There had been talk, Lana knew, among the servants, that Eloise had become of an interest to Langlevitt. If he did not yet know of her death, Lana didn't want to be the one to inform him. Selfishly, she didn't want him distracted either. "Never mind why, I'll explain later. My sister, where is she?" Langlevitt muttered something underneath his breath and locked the front door, throwing the bolts and placing the pistol's barrel into the waist of his trousers. The weapon did not bode well. "She's not here," he answered, his tone rich with impatience and exasperation. The stony knot in Lana's stomach grew larger, and she bit back tears. "I've only arrived tonight," he said, gesturing for her to enter the receiving room. "I've sent my staff away as a precaution. I can't put them in harm's way, should anyone unsavoury arrive." He slanted a look at Lana. "Why have you come here, Princess?" "My uncle, he's in London. It's not safe there. And after hearing Irina might be here—" "I should never have written to you. They are using her as a lure. Don't you understand that?" A part of her had, yes. Dangling Irina's life or death over Lana's head would certainly entice her to come out of hiding. Victor and her uncle both must have known to what extent Lana would go in order to protect her sister. They had to have known that she would give herself up in an instant. But the impossibility of it still lingered. Irina knew about the letters. She knew Victor and Count Volkonsky were spies. So did Langlevitt. They were all in danger, no matter where they were. "She depends upon me," Lana cried. "If anything should happen to her—" She couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't know how. A world without Irina was not a world she wanted to live in. Irina was the only real family she had left, and she could not lose her. Lana shook her head again, trying to dispel the tears brimming in her eyes. Frustration and fear bound her tongue, and she couldn't speak. Langlevitt stepped forward and took her shoulders in his hands. They gripped her firmly, and when she dragged in a breath and opened her eyes, she saw the Earl's head cocked to the side, his eyes boring into hers. Firelight danced on one half of his face. He was a handsome man, stately, like his home, as trustworthy as its walls and as strong as its foundation stones. Lana relaxed under his steady gaze. "I gave you my promise in St. Petersburg, Lana. Your father was a trusted friend, and I will not allow any injustice or harm to come to his daughters." Hearing him address her by her given name for the first time surprised her. Oddly, though, it made her feel even more at ease in his presence. With a shaky nod, she placed her hands upon his chest. He wore his shirt-sleeves and waistcoat, his collar unadorned by a cravat. His hair was rumpled and his jaw unshaven. Of course, he'd let his valet go to protect him, the same way she'd pushed Grey away in London in order to protect him. Distracted by thoughts of Gray upon thoughts of Irina, her fingertips frantically worked the small embroidered pattern of ivy on the Earl's waistcoat, a dry sob catching in her throat. "I know, and I'm so grateful. I truly can't thank you enough for everything you've done." "Stop," he said, and gently pulled her closer into a brotherly embrace. "I want no thanks, not until I retrieve Irina, and I will," he added, pulling back so he could see her fully. "Even without me you would have other help. Northridge, for example. I know that he is suspicious of Zakharov." Lana dropped her eyes, her distraught fingers stalling out on the embroidery. "If anything should happen to me, Lana, you must go to Northridge. He's a good man. You can trust him." She gathered a breath, the calming pressure of Langlevitt's hands on her shoulders making her swirling thoughts be still for the first time. "I know. He knows," she said, her voice soft. "About me, I mean." Langlevitt let go of one shoulder and nudged Lana's chin up so he could look at her, incredulous. "What are you saying? He knows you are the princess?" She shook her head quickly, her chin trapped in Langlevitt's hand. "No, not that. He thinks I'm the missing princess's maid. He knew something was off about me, and he now knows Zakharov is searching for them. I mean, me. But he doesn't know it, and, I didn't know how to explain it to you. And then you were going to meet with your contact about the cipher, and Gray wouldn't stop pressing me to tell him the truth." "Gray?" Langlevitt said, interrupting her incomprehensible rambling. She sealed her lips, her eyes wide. She shouldn't have called him that. The Earl opened his mouth to speak again, when several loud bangs on the front door cracked through the silence. He released Lana and stepped away, drawing the pistol from his waist. He held out a hand to her. "Stay here," he whispered, then pointed to the hearth. "Take up a weapon. Hide." She stared at the iron shovel and poker that hung on a stand next to the fire, her heart in her throat. The next knock on the front door practically shook the house. She heard the person rattling the locked knob, trying to get inside. Lana raced to the hearth and took up the heavy iron poker, as Langlevitt called out to their unexpected visitor. Chapter 24. Gray slammed his fist down upon the entrance to Heartstone. He seethed with fury, his roiling temper seconds away from overwhelming his ability to think. And thinking was all he'd been doing for the last 24 hours, ever since Croydon's arrival outside the King's Theatre. Worrying that Zakharov would be headed straight for Essex, straight for Lana. Even if she'd been telling the truth about her betrothal, which he now suspected she wasn't, Gray didn't want her in any danger, especially at the hands of Zakharov. It had been close to midnight, and setting off on the North Road out of London at such an hour would have been asking to be robbed at gunpoint, stripped of his horse, his coin, and very possibly his life. So he'd paced Bishop House, his muscles tense and his mind roiling with unease, waiting restlessly until the first drop of dawn's light lit the sky. He'd taken off for Essex, nearly riding Ferro into the ground that first hour on the road. When Gray had finally reached Breckenham in the waning daylight, as a ceiling of foreboding clouds settled overhead, he'd pushed his lathered mount up Ferndale's long drive, muttering a slew of curses. He'd avoided the front door, and ultimately his parents, and had gone straight to the kitchens in search of Lana. The other servants had shaken their heads with alarm. She had not been seen for some time, they'd said. James, the footman, had said she'd received a letter and had rushed off to read it. Gray had chucked every last shred of propriety out the window and climbed the 4 flights of stairs to the servants' quarters. He'd gone into each and every room, not knowing which one belonged to Lana until he'd found it. He recognized her scent the moment he stepped over the threshold, and her familiar black cloak had been tossed without care onto the floor. He'd stepped in and picked up the cloak, only to find a folded white card slipping from its pocket. Gray had read it, and his blood began to boil. "I must see you. Black coach outside. L." The bloody handwriting! It was the same from the poem he'd found on the floor of the coach when he'd been convinced Lana had been meeting with a lover. He'd memorized every silly line, laughing to himself that women could find such nonsense appealing. He'd thought the poet to be some local swain in Breckenham. He couldn't have been more wrong. Langlevitt was the author of both. God, he'd been so blind, so goddamned gullible. Lana had told him herself she didn't want to be with any man of her acquaintance. Yet in her hour of need, Lana had gone to one of them. She'd trusted Langlevitt, not Gray. I must see you. He'd crumpled the note in his fist. Gray's heart clenched in agony. Clearly, having a betrothed hadn't been her only secret. How often had she and Langlevitt met like this in the past months? How many times had they written such sonnets of undying love to each other? Was it before or after she'd lain with Gray? He'd never figured the Earl for a poet, but apparently love turned men into colossal fools. It certainly had turned him into one. Gray thought of that night in London, when he'd spied Lana slipping into a waiting carriage, not knowing then that the Earl was within. She'd promised that there was nothing untoward happening between her and her anonymous peer protector, and Gray had believed her. And even when he'd discovered Langlevitt's note, a small part of him had hoped that Lana's feelings for the Earl had been in the past, before him, before Gray. But he'd never been more wrong. He'd come to Heartstone, and through the wide windows had seen Lana looking up into Langlevitt's face, his fingers caressing her jaw, holding her in a lover's embrace, their bodies so close together that not an inch of space remained between them. Her profile had been lit partially by the firelight, and the devoted look in her eyes, as she'd gazed at the Earl, had made Gray nearly stagger to his knees. She'd stared at him with the same trust before. The night in his bedroom, when she'd admitted to needing help with Zakharov, when she'd broken down in panic outside the Mews upon learning her sister had been found, when she'd won her hand in 21 and claimed her prize. She'd gazed at him with rapturous certainty when her luscious, deceitful body had been splayed beneath him. Gray drew a ragged breath. His hand shook as he raised it again to slam into the mahogany panel of the door. Rage and jealousy consumed him, incapacitating any ability to think clearly. Had she given herself to Langlevitt as well? Had she also wanted to know what it was like to lie with a goddamned Earl? None of her words at the funeral service had been lies after all. He'd just been too blind, too infatuated to see it. "Who is it?" A man's voice, muffled and cautious. Gray's fury simmered anew. Of course the bastard would be cautious. Lana had come to his home in the middle of the night. For what, comfort? "Northridge, open this door." "North? What are you doing?" The door opened far enough for Gray to get enough leverage with his shoulder to smash his fist into Langlevitt's face. Grim satisfaction overtook him as Langlevitt stumbled backward, a pistol clattering to the floor as the Earl clutched his bleeding mouth. Gray kicked the door shut behind him, only partially taking in the lack of lighting and the absence of any staff. The other part of him saw Langlevitt's state of half-dress. Gray's lewd imaginings took flight like a provoked swarm of bees. "I know she is here," he growled, advancing toward the double doors that led to the salon Lana and Langlevitt had been standing in moments before. Langlevitt swiped at the blood flecking his lips and spit a mouthful to the polished marble floor. His voice was calm. "For Christ's sake, Northridge, what the hell has gotten into you?" "A healthy dose of the truth, it would seem," he answered before pushing the doors open wide. "Gray?" The soft voice came from a shadowed corner of the salon. She came forward, her feminine form taking shape out of the darkness. He couldn't stop the immediate stutter of his heart at the sight of her, and gritted his teeth in disgust at his body's weak response. "What are you doing here?" she asked, the poker in her hand falling to her side. Gray took in little details, like the heightened colour in her cheeks and her tousled hair, half of the dark mass hanging loose, as if she'd only just tumbled out of bed. His anger escalated. He drew his eyes along her person and flared his nostrils, annoyed at the emotion knotting his throat. How could a woman look so angelic and be such a scheming opportunist at the same time?
She was a wolf in sheep's clothing, a chameleon, and he'd fallen for every one of her lies. "The question, love," he drawled, "is what have you been doing?" Her eyes widened as she took his meaning. "No, Gray—" She broke off, looking past him with a stricken expression to Langlevitt, who had entered the salon. Gray felt nothing but numbness spreading across his body as she dropped the poker and held her hands out to him. The same numbness he'd nearly drowned in when Lana had speared his heart in that church alcove. "Lord Northridge, it isn't like that." "Why so formal, sweet?" he said, pain and anger causing his voice to pull low. "You don't understand," she said. "I'm afraid neither do I," Langlevitt interjected from behind Gray. The Earl sauntered into Gray's view, the pistol he'd dropped earlier back in his hand. Though his grip was relaxed and the barrel pointed at the floor, Langlevitt's eyes blazed with suspicion. They flicked between Lana and Gray, his mouth a grim slash. Gray withdrew the card he'd found in Lana's room from his pocket and flung it to the floor. "Does this help jog either of your memories?" His eyes went to Lana. "How long has he been sending you love letters?" "Love letters," she said, her hand rising to her throat. "Poems," he snarled. "I found one weeks ago on the coach floor. You'd dropped it. The handwriting on the Earl's card is one and the same. I must say, Langlevitt, I expected better from you. They were truly atrocious. The one question I have for my sister's lovely maid, however, is whether she was as careless with her favours as you were with your words." The Earl's eyes narrowed on him. "What have you done, Northridge?" "I? Oh, that's rich, you bloody hypocrite. It seems rather clear to me that we've sampled the same waters." "Gray!" Lana's cry was a hoarse whisper of disbelief. "You bastard," Langlevitt muttered, his lips barely moving. "Henry," Lana begged, as if to quell the skyrocketing tension between the two men. She blinked in mute shock, as if realizing what she'd called him. "Lord Langlevitt, please explain to him." "Henry?" Gray interrupted, his attention revolving back to her. They were on such familiar terms that she could call him by his given name? The memory of Lana dropping his title and addressing him as Gray for the first time struck him. He remembered how it had felt, hearing his name on her tongue, her voice moaning it as he touched her. Something hot and wild consumed Gray then, a jealousy so unhinged that it made him feel like he had the strength and the rage of 1,000 men. "Henry has no need to explain. I understand him perfectly. He likes the water he's sampled." Gray's eyes bored into Lana's, the desire to hurt her stemming from a place that revolted him, and yet he did not stop. He could not stop. He wanted her to break as he was breaking inside. "He simply doesn't like the idea of sipping from a public fountain." Langlevitt moved like a bullet, crashing into Gray's torso and slamming them both to the floor. The gun clattered to the floor a second time, and Langlevitt used the free hand to pound his fist into Gray's stomach. Gray fought back with every shred of force in him, but his anger had risen so high and hot that he couldn't think. He struck out at Langlevitt, his fists glancing off muscled flesh. He couldn't land a decent strike, even though they were fairly matched in size. Langlevitt had skill and experience on his side, and it wasn't long before Gray felt the Earl's arm cinch around his throat. He'd maneuvered him into a chokehold. "Don't hurt him!" Lana cried out. "Stop struggling," Langlevitt warned, as he swung around to twist Gray's arm up the middle of his back. "I don't want to break your arm." "Break it," Gray grunted. Lana stooped beside them. "Stop this, both of you! Lord Northridge!" Gray smiled through the agony, not because of his arm, the bone currently straining toward a fracture. It was his heart, cleaving into two as he looked up into her beautiful, treacherous face. "Not Gray, as you so tenderly called me at the Cock and the Crown?" Lana clapped her hands to her mouth, her horrified gaze riveting not on him, but on the Earl, whose hands viciously tightened. Gray's shoulder felt like it would rip out of its socket at any second. "You took her where?" Langlevitt's hissed words at his ear were blunt and lethal. "It's not his fault,"
Lana rushed to explain. "We had a carriage accident, and the gaming hell was our only option. Release him, please. It's time he knew the truth." Gray frowned at the clipped, aristocratic tones. What truth? There was more to her deception? "I will not, unless he agrees to yield," the Earl replied. "Fine," Gray snapped. "I yield." He would listen to whatever new lies she came up with, and then he would take his leave. The sooner he put this scheming seductress and her lover out of his life, the better. The thought carved a deep gulch in the centre of his chest. Langlevitt released him slowly, and Gray scrambled backward, rotating his aching shoulder. The Earl stood and walked over to the mantel, where he poured himself a liberal glass of whisky. He offered a second glass to Gray, who took it after a moment and downed the drink, feeling it burn and fill the hollow spaces within him. "My apologies for the lack of staff," Langlevitt said as he refilled Gray's empty glass. "Your apologies are wasted on me," he replied, ensconcing himself in an armchair and throwing one booted foot over his knee. He turned to Lana. "By all means, Miss Volchek, take your time declaring yourself. I trust it's not another surprise betrothal." Flinching at his tone, Lana cleared her throat as she perched on the embroidered sofa opposite him. The threading shimmered in the firelight like gold. Hell, it could have been gold for all Gray knew. Langlevitt was not lacking in fortune. Perhaps she had thought him a better diversion than Gray, one without an illegitimate child tied to him. The little that remained of his battered heart shriveled into a ball as he steeled himself and looked at her. He instantly wished he hadn't. She'd never looked more heartbreakingly beautiful. All he wanted to do was pull her into his arms and salve his misery with her body. Love made people want to do foolish things, it seemed, like turn to the ones who had broken them in the first place. "I didn't mean to lie to you," she began. "And yet you did." He sipped his whisky and smiled politely at her. "When did the lies begin to pile up and become too much to navigate? Before or after our afternoon at the Crown?" A glass crashed down onto a countertop, shattering pieces of crystal everywhere, as Langlevitt turned to them with a murderous look on his face. "Exactly what happened between the two of you at that gaming hell?" Gray lifted an arrogant eyebrow, the insinuation obvious. It was amusing that Langlevitt was now the one who was jealous. He frowned and reassessed the thought as his eyes met the Earl's. Langlevitt did not look jealous in the least. He looked shocked and protective. Gray's grin was as humourless as his rejoinder. "Perhaps you should read some of your poems if you lack sufficient imagination." "Do not test my patience," Langlevitt ground out. "Enough!" Lana stalled the Earl once more with a flick of her palm, colour blooming in her cheeks. "Those poems were coded messages, Lord Northridge, about the Baron. Nothing more." Then she turned to Langlevitt, her voice quiet. "I am a grown woman." "But my lady—" "My lady?" Gray's frown deepened as Lana stood and walked to Langlevitt's side. "You've been a good friend, and I thank you for everything you've done. But my choices are mine alone. I do not wish to speak of what transpired at the Crown." She hadn't wanted to use the word cock, Gray noted with a spike of bitter amusement, as she turned back to him. Just like a lady. Lady Lana, just as the besotted stable hands and footmen called her. They were no worse off than he. Infatuated, foolish, and wrecked beyond belief. Lady Lana. He noted once more what they must have seen, the regal slope of her shoulders, and the tilt of that imperious chin. He heard what they had as well, the precise diction and the gentle command of her words. Gray would have stumbled if he hadn't been sitting. Time drew to a stuttered halt as he saw what he'd been utterly blind to before. How many times had he noted how differently she carried and conducted herself from other maids? Now he understood Langlevitt's sudden and protective reaction, and the appalled look on his face earlier. Because Lana wasn't a maid at all. The realization was slow at first, but then it gathered speed like a rock rolling downhill. Gray swallowed. "You're the missing princess." She nodded, her heart in her eyes as Langlevitt crossed the marble floor toward them. His voice was only slightly mocking. "Lord Northridge, allow me to present Princess Svetlanka Volkonsky." Gray sat forward, the whiskey glass in his hand slipping. He caught it, though barely, his fingers having turned to air. "Svetlanka," he repeated dully. "Lana for short." Everything stilled in that moment as all the pieces crashed together, all the hints and the clues he'd refused to see. The way she talked, the way she held herself. She was a bloody princess, acting as a maid. And hell, he'd taken her innocence, in a damned gaming hell. Not a breath was drawn in the explosive silence until the front door to Hearthstone slammed into the wall. Langlevitt dove to the mantel, reappearing with his pistol, while Gray leaped to his feet. "Not one move," Zakharov warned, striding in. He was followed by 3 burly men. They were all armed, and the Earl lowered his weapon. "Your Highness," Zakharov said in an unnaturally loud and jovial voice to Lana. "It's good to see you alive and well." She showed no fear at all. "Where's my sister, you piece of scum?" Now, he said in a falsely sweet tone that made Gray want to break his teeth. "That's no way to talk to your betrothed." Gray clenched his jaw. This was her betrothed, not a pauper boy, but Zakharov? "I will never marry you," Lana hissed. Zakharov smirked. "I have a feeling you will soon change your mind." "Where is Irina?" Lana demanded, her eyes flicking toward one of the 3 men standing behind the Baron. "You're the one my uncle sent to Cambria. What have you done to her?" Gray could hear the tremor beneath her words. The man she'd been speaking to, a tall and greasy-looking fellow, smirked. "To your sister?" the man asked, his French accent strong. "Nothing at all. However, I was forced to take care of the blundering brute that was on my trail. What was his name? Hurst?" Hurstly. Gray ground his teeth. Damn it, he'd gotten the man killed. Gray wanted to put a bullet between the Frenchman's smiling teeth for it, too. "Your sister is safe," Zakharov agreed, waving his arm. "For now. But her continued safety depends entirely upon you. You will need to come with me." "She will not," Gray said, his arm rising to bar Lana from taking a step forward. Zakharov smiled at him. "She has no choice, Lord Northridge. After all, her young sister's life rests in her hands." 1,000 emotions stormed across Lana's face. Gray knew she would acquiesce, if only out of loyalty to her sister. "Lana, no." "He's right. I have to go with him. For Irina." Lana nodded to Langlevitt before pushing past Gray's arm. He tried to catch her elbow, but she wrenched free. She looked up at him, her voice low so that only he could hear it. "I'm sorry that I lied to you about who I was, and I said terrible things to you last week. Dishonest things. I only wanted to keep you away from this." She shook her head. "Nothing else was a lie. I hope you believe that." Gray wanted to catch her arm and haul her back behind him, but the pistol trained at his head from one of Zakharov's men kept him still. He didn't trust himself to speak, but did anyway. "I'll find you." As Lana disappeared from view, Zakharov's voice filtered back before the door slammed shut. "Kill them." Gray and Langlevitt exchanged a single look before the Earl exploded into motion, his gun firing as he dove simultaneously to the second gunman. Gray tackled the Frenchman, who stood nearest him, as another gunshot rent the air. He felt the bullet whiz by his face, narrowly missing him as he collided with the man. They went rolling across the floor, knocking over a marble bust. Gray grabbed a chunk of the broken marble, slamming it into the Frenchman's head again and again, until he went still. "Bastard!" he grunted, and then stood, panting. He watched Langlevitt make quick work of the second man.
The first was dead, Langlevitt's precise shot, now a gaping wound at the centre of the man's forehead. The Earl raced to the door, but Zakharov had already disappeared. They stared at each other in the charged silence. Langlevitt was the first to speak. "You love her." "What?" "You love her." It was not a question. Gray considered lying, but knew Langlevitt would see right through him. "Yes, I do." "Good." The Earl smiled, but it didn't reassure Gray in the least. "I didn't want to have to call you out at dawn. We both know I'm a better shot than you. We will settle this later, and mark my words, it will be settled to my satisfaction. For now the princesses are in danger, and Zakharov has had a decent head start. Their uncle, the Count, plotted with Zakharov to murder their father. Lana has letters in her possession that will incriminate them both." "The coded ones?" Langlevitt stared at him, as if surprised Gray had this knowledge. "Yes, which means he will go back to Ferndale to retrieve the letters." The Earl paused. "This is not a game, North. I will understand if you wish to remain here." Gray felt cold resolve settle into his bones. "Not on your life." The gunshot had made Lana's blood run cold, but Victor's firm grip upon her arm kept her from lurching away, back toward the house. "Into the carriage," he snarled, all but tossing her in before climbing in after her. Her attention was arrested by the tiny female figure cowering on one of the seats. "Lana!" Irina's face was tear-stained as she threw herself into her sister's arms. "Oh, my God, you're alive!" Lana held her sister close, her own tears breaking loose. Her eyes flicked to their uncle, sitting at Irina's side. "Did they hurt you?" "No." Irina shook her head. "Lana, I was so scared that something had happened to you. I was out for a walk in the gardens, and a man came out of nowhere, forcing me to go with him. The next person I saw was him." Her head jerked to the stern-faced Count watching them. He said they would kill Countess Langlevitt if I didn't tell him where you were, but I didn't know the name of the estate." Lana raised cold eyes to her uncle. His smile made her want to tear it off his face. "Lovely to see you, Svetlanka. You've been busy, niece." "You're no family of mine," Lana snapped. "You deceiving bastard." The Count tisked, studying her down the length of his prominent nose, his mouth curling with displeasure. "How did you find us?" "We followed Lord Northridge," Victor interjected, his voice mocking. "I knew something was amiss when he tried so hard to deter me from speaking with you, and the connection with Langlevitt was too coincidental not to investigate further." He grinned, waving the pistol. "And I was right, wasn't I? He led me straight to you." Lana ignored him, staring at her uncle and trying to conceal her loathing for the man. "What do you want?" "You know what I want. The documents you stole." "I stole nothing. They belonged to my father." Her mind was racing. She'd noticed the driver and one other man out front, but only Victor in the carriage displayed a weapon. Perhaps she could distract him and then snatch the pistol. The thought, though satisfying, was not without its risks. What if the gun went off and Irina was hurt? What if her uncle had a pistol hidden under his coat? And no matter how quick she was, her uncle wouldn't stand by and let her gain the upper hand. No, she could not take that chance. She'd have to wait until they arrived at their destination and hope for an opportunity then. But what if he had more men? What then? Her thoughts passed to Gray and Langlevitt, and the gunshot that had echoed as they'd left the house. She refused to consider that either of the men were dead. Langlevitt was far too seasoned in the art of war to have been taken down in such a manner. And Gray? She didn't even want to consider it. The odds hadn't been in their favor, not with 3 of the men holding weapons. But she'd just seen Gray and Langlevitt square off against each other, and based on that, she knew neither of them would have gone down without a fight. She clenched her jaw, and neither would she. "Where are you taking us?" "Your place of employment." Victor chuckled at his own joke. "Of course." Ferndale. Her heart sank. Lord and Lady Dinsmore and Bryn were there. The house was fully staffed,
She knew all too well what this man and her uncle were capable of. If they could kill a Russian Grand Duke and his wife, what was stopping them from murdering anyone who happened to be in the way? Her gaze slid to Irina, who sat immobile at her uncle's side, her fingers twisting in her lap. Lana was proud that she displayed no fear, even though one of his hands was tightly manacled above her elbow. She sent her a reassuring smile. "Let's get down to it, niece," her uncle said, his sarcastic emphasis on the last word evident. "I believe you have something of mine." She lifted her chin. "Did you kill my parents?" The man actually had the audacity to smile. "My brother got himself embroiled in a situation that was beyond him, but what happened in that carriage was a tragic accident. Didn't you read the news sheets?" Lana drew a sharp breath, contempt for the man who called himself her uncle filling her. "He found out you were selling crown secrets to the French, so you killed him." The Count's eyes narrowed, his lips thinning. "Where are the documents?" "Not until you admit the truth." Lana was unprepared for him lurching forward, or for the backhand that cracked across her face. Her sister's cry was the only thing that kept her from fainting. Hot, white stars swam in her vision as warm blood seeped into her mouth. Her teeth ached as if they'd been loosened. "Don't provoke me," he snarled. "Where are the papers?" She swallowed a mouthful of blood and squared her shoulders. He wasn't going to allow them to live, not after she handed over the papers. She'd risk another blow to her cheek for the one thing she'd been craving for months. The truth. Her uncle moved to the edge of the seat, sitting nose to nose with her, his hatred oozing out of every pore as his eyes bored into hers. "Grigory deserved to die. And yes, I killed him. Now tell me where my documents are before I slit your darling sister's throat." Even though Lana already knew what he'd done, hearing the cold, unrepentant confession from his lips brought a wave of pain so agonizing that she almost doubled over. She vowed that she would find a way to make him pay, no matter the cost and no matter how long it took. And if not in this lifetime, then in the next. She would never rest until he was punished for what he'd done. "Harm one hair on her head, and it will be the last thing that you do," she snapped through her teeth. "The papers are at Ferndale." Her mind was working furiously. The only thing she had to bargain with were the documents. Langlevitt had written that the cryptographer he'd found had met with an unexpected end, no doubt at Victor's hands, and without being able to decipher the letters, she had no proof to use against either of the men. She didn't care much for her own safety, but she worried for Irina's. "I will give you the letters in exchange for Irina's freedom," she said, as they pulled into the deserted courtyard at Ferndale. "Lana, no, not without you," Irina blurted out. Her uncle laughed in her face. "You do not make terms." "You should know that I have copied the letters, and that Lord Langlevitt is not the only man at the War Office who has seen the originals," Lana said coolly. "One set is at Ferndale, and the other is elsewhere, safe and awaiting my word." He froze in anger. "You are lying." "That is for you to decide, uncle. It is your choice whether you live in constant fear of discovery or agree to my proposition. Irina's freedom for the letters, including the hidden copies. I will send a message for them to be destroyed." His expression shifted again, this time into something carefully blank. "What do I care? To anyone else these are nothing but love letters." "Until they are deciphered," she replied, undaunted. "And you and I both know what they will say then. Do you really want to invite such risk, keep such a threat hanging over your head, ready to fall when you least expect it?" The Count's gaze flicked to Victor, who hadn't uttered a word since their arrival. A sadistic smile worked over his face. "Irina's freedom and your hand in marriage to Victor." Everything within her recoiled at the base suggestion. It was what her uncle had been planning all along. He wanted the Volkonsky fortune, and a marriage to the odious Baron would ensure it. She couldn't fathom becoming that man's wife. Having him touch her as a husband would? Having him touch her as Gray had? The mere thought revolted her. "No, I will not."
"I thought you would say that."
The oily voice was Victor's.
"So I wish to provide some incentive. My man has been looking into yours and Lord Northridge's activities, and your recent foray to North London. We have a lovely new guest with us."
"What guest?" Lana asked, her blood turning to ice in her veins.
"A precious little thing with beautiful blonde hair," Victor said. "She looks so much like her father, I must say."
Lana's breath stalled as her hands curled into powerless fists at her sides. She leaned toward him and stopped short. "If you've hurt her—" Victor's smile was triumphant, as was her uncle's.
"She is safe and sound in London, Princess, and awaiting our arrival. Her continued safety, too, depends entirely upon you. Agree to marry me, and she will be returned safely home."
"You are despicable." Helpless rage filled every part of her as she eyed her uncle, but there was nothing she could do. She was the one who had drawn Gray, and now Sophia, into this. She was the one who had put them in danger, and she would have to pay the price to release them. She closed her eyes. There was no other way. Irina was safe, and Sophia would be too. Her sacrifice was a small cost. Lana crossed the floor of the carriage to her sister, pulling her into her arms, her whisper soft against her ear. "If Lord Northridge is alive, find him and tell him everything. He will make sure you are safe. I love you, my sister."
"Lana, no! You can't do this!"
Irina cried. Lana wiped the tears from her sister's face, memorizing every curve and every hollow, and the way her soft, dark hair curled into her cheeks. "I must." She turned to her uncle, her chin high. "Once Irina is safe, and Sophia is out of harm's way, you have my word." Chapter 25. Gray wasn't going to take any chances being seen or heard coming upon Ferndale. It was an overcast night, but the moon was high and bright behind the clouds. If he could easily see the bright swells and shadowy dips of Ferndale's meadows as he rode over them, then Zakharov and his comrades would be able to see a horse and rider streaking toward the main house. They would be keeping watch on the main drive up to the manor, waiting either for the 3 brutish men he and Langlevitt had dispatched, or for any signal that the 3 had failed in their task. So Gray had travelled through the woods he knew well, aided by the unusual gleam of moonlight, and approached the house around the rear, near the pagoda just outside his father's library. Langlevitt, meanwhile, had taken the obvious main drive, with a mission to distract Zakharov's cronies long enough for Gray to slip inside the manor through a rear entrance or window. The Russian had entered Heartstone with 3 men at his side, but he undoubtedly had more in the carriage in which he'd whisked Lana away. Gray was going to kill Zakharov. He held no qualms about that. The man was a traitor and a threat to Lana. Svetlanka. His mind had still not grasped the truth. She wasn't the princess's maid. She hadn't been cast aside, as she'd led Gray to believe. She was Russian nobility. He had known at some level that she was no servant. Her poise and her stubborn pride, her elegance and educated mind, her skill at dancing and riding, and even her ability to read French. They had all spoken the truth, even if Gray's ears and eyes hadn't been listening or seeing at the time. He'd only been focused on one thing, his all-consuming attraction to her. But now was not the time to focus on who Lana was. He only needed to focus on how to get her to safety. And then, how to make sure Zakharov and Lana's duplicitous uncle could not do any more harm. Gray dismounted his horse and tied him off on the low-hanging branch of an apple tree near the pagoda. He took the pistol Langlevitt had armed him with, and listened. Any commotion at the front of the manor would signal Langlevitt had been spotted. But nothing came. Pure silence. Gray entered his father's library through the pair of glass doors on a small, secluded terrace. The grand room was dark, the only noise the soft scuffing of his Hessian's soles over the Persian rug. When he reached the door that led into a dimly lit corridor, he paused and knew. They were not here. Gray threw open the door and stormed down the corridor to the foyer, and at that same moment the front door crashed open. Langlevitt appeared, pistol in hand, a second holstered at his thigh.
"We are too late," he grit out.
"Or they were never here," Gray replied, annoyed and infuriated, but not with the Earl.
"They must have been. Lana keeps the letters with her at all times, and if she had returned to Ferndale, they would be among her possessions."
"Lord Langlevitt!" A wisp of a girl with long untended dark hair darted from the front sitting-room and collided with the Earl. She threw her arms around him and buried her head in his chest. Gray had never set eyes on her before, but at once he knew who she was.
"Irina,"
Langlevitt said, the hand not holding the pistol coming up to cup the back of her head. She wore a yellow day dress creased with wrinkles, and when she pulled her face from Langlevitt's waistcoat, Gray's breath left him in a rush. Though still young, the girl bore such a resemblance to Lana that he couldn't think for a minute. She had the same proud cheekbones and long glossy hair, though her eyes were violet instead of green.
"Lana's sister,"
Langlevitt said to Gray, bringing the girl's startled eyes to him.
"Where is she? Where is Lana?"
Braxton's shoes tapped quickly into the foyer behind Gray, followed almost as quickly by those of his parents. They emerged from the sitting-room cautiously, their eyes wide with alarm. "Graham?" his mother said, her colouring high on her cheeks. She was upset, and if her lack of speech was any sign, utterly confused.
"What the devil is happening here?"
Lord Dinsmore asked.
"I'd like to know the same thing,"
Gray replied, and then echoed Langlevitt's question.
"Where is Lana?"
Braxton spoke first.
"My lord, it is utterly preposterous what this girl is saying, but at least one thing is true. There was a carriage. It trundled up the drive with Lady Briannon's maid, who was accompanied by one of Lord Dinsmore's prior guests, Baron Zakharov."
Despite his usual stoic composure, the butler had trouble concealing his scandalized expression. Gray understood instantly what Braxton would be thinking, having seen Lana arrive alone in such company.
"I've already told you, Braxton, you cannot possibly have it right," Lord Dinsmore grumbled. "What on earth would Zakharov be doing in Essex, and with Briannon's maid, no less?"
Gray ignored his father for a moment. There was no time to explain.
"What then?"
he asked Braxton.
"Miss Volchek went to her room, accompanied by Lord Zakharov. They tarried but for a moment before bolting off again and leaving this waif, whom I can only assume is some relation, on the doorstep.
I am deeply sorry, my lords, my lady," he said, bowing to them all.
"I will have her sent to the kitchens at once." "You will do no such thing,"
Gray said tiredly, scrubbing a palm through his hair.
"This young lady is indeed Miss Volchek's sister, but she is Princess Irina Volkonsky, and you will accord her with the proper respect."
His mother's speech came roaring back to her.
"Princess!"
she shrieked. Braxton's surprise flashed in his eyes as well, but he bowed quickly.
"Of course, my lord. My apologies, your highness." "How long ago did they leave in the carriage?"
Gray asked, already anxious to find a fresh mount and follow.
"Less than 10 minutes, my lord, at the most," Braxton answered.
"Graham!" his mother cried, coming forward. She stopped abruptly and made a small, perfunctory curtsy toward the young princess, still wrapped protectively under Langlevitt's arm. "Please tell us what is happening."
"Lana is in danger. I can't explain all of it right now, but I will, I promise. Thank you, Braxton. Please have a footman fetch me some paper and a quill." "If this young lady is a princess and Miss Volchek's sister," Lord Dinsmore began.
2 seconds hadn't passed before Lady Dinsmore strangled a gasp and clapped her hands over her mouth. "I see I don't need to explain after all," Gray said, knowing his mother had made the connection. Braxton returned, and Gray scribbled a note on the piece of parchment and signalled to the waiting footman. "Send our fastest messenger to deliver this to Lord Thorndale at this address in London, and have James saddle 2 of the strongest mounts at once."
He turned to the Earl, who still held the girl cradled under one arm. "Our window is small, even if we ride at a breakneck pace. We have no idea if they will go to where the Count is staying, or Zakharov's old apartments at the Stevens Hotel, or somewhere else altogether." Langlevitt held the girl out so he could peer down into her frightened face. "Did you hear anything? Do you know where they are going, Princess?" She jutted her chin in a way that reminded Grey of Lana, though it wobbled slightly. "Back to London," she said. "They are planning to set sail for home, where Lana and the Baron will be wed." "Wed?" Langlevitt choked. His eyes met Grey's, whose hands clenched into fists at his sides. The storm brewing in his veins hit full force at the thought of Zakharov anywhere near Lana. "I thought Zakharov wanted the princesses for treason," Lord Dinsmore said in a near shout. "What is this about a marriage?" Irina shook her head, her curls springing. "He is the treasonous one, and Uncle Ivan forced her to agree." Grey frowned. "In exchange for the letters and your freedom?" His eyes narrowed as the girl nodded. "And she went to her quarters here with Zakharov?" "Yes." Grey set off at a run, taking the stairs 2 at a time, the Earl hot on his heels. He pushed open the door to her room for the 2nd time that day, his heart in his throat. The Spartan chamber wasn't empty. Mrs. Frommer, the housekeeper, stood near the bed, rifling through Lana's possessions, some articles of clothing already draped over one arm. The woman was worse than a bloody vulture. Grey's gaze narrowed as he made his presence known. Mrs. Frommer paled. "My lord," she began with a guilty look, "that scheming little thief ran in here with a man who must be her lover to—" "Get out," he snapped, "or so help me, I'll remove you myself." Paling further, she bobbed and fled from the room. He entered the chamber and saw Lana's black cloak on the floor still. Only this time there was a suitcase open on her bed and some strewn clothing around it. A nearby chest was open, but it offered no clues. Grey frowned, his eyes searching the room methodically. The Lana he knew would not have left without a sign of some sort, a trail of breadcrumbs. She was too smart not to know, not to trust, that he would be close behind. Following the Earl, Irina entered the small room tentatively, blinking back tears. Grey was about to give up his search when his eyes fell on the discarded clothes on the bed that hadn't been there earlier. It was a pair of Bryn's breeches, the ones Lana had worn when she'd taken it upon herself to break into Zakharov's rooms at the Stevens alone. A breadcrumb, as it were. He almost sighed with relief. "They're going to the Stevens Hotel," he said. "Are you certain?" Langlevitt asked. "Yes, let's go." Grey's eyes moved to Irina, who stood near Lana's chest of drawers. She held a small, framed portrait. Tears were pouring down her face, and Grey felt the oddest inclination to comfort her. "All will be well again, Princess," he said. "I'll get her back." The girl bit her lips, raising her bleak eyes to his. "She told me to find you. She said you would make sure that I was safe." Grey's heart hammered in his chest at her soft words. Lana had trusted him enough to want to put Irina in his care. Irina fingered the gold frame of the portrait, and Grey frowned at it. Lana must have kept the portrait tucked away. Such a frame would be out of place in servants' quarters. It was made of heavy, ornate gold, easily worth 2 years' wages of any maid. Lana was younger in the portrait, likely the same age as Irina was now, standing and smiling with their parents. "May I?" Grey asked, reaching for it at the same moment that she released it. The frame clattered to the wooden floor, the glass cracking and the backing coming loose. They both knelt at the same time, Irina uttering a sharp cry of disappointment as she reached for the portrait. A piece of thick parchment coming loose from the frame's backing caught Grey's attention. "Langlevitt," he said, his voice hoarse. "Is this what I think it is?" The Earl stooped beside him. His eyes met Grey's as he unfolded it. It was a rectangle of stiff parchment with odd cutouts at various intervals. "It's the key," Langlevitt said, staring at it in shocked disbelief, as if expecting it to disappear at any moment.
His triumphant gaze lifted to the young girl at his side, and he grabbed her in a jubilant embrace. "You did it, Irina!" A blush suffused her cheeks as she gazed wide-eyed at the Earl. "Did what?" "Found the cipher your father hid for safekeeping," Grey finished, and rose to his feet. "Come, we have no time to waste." They made their way back downstairs, where his parents were still standing in hushed conversation, and a few more curious staff had gathered. "Lord Dinsmore, Princess Irina will have to stay here, if that is fine by you," Langlevitt said as they entered the foyer. Grey's father and mother both nodded, Lady Dinsmore with a touch too much vigour. "But of course, she is most welcome," his mother said, her eyes clouding over. "But, Graham, this all sounds so very dangerous." "It is. That is why I must go." Taking a breath, he added, "Lana, Princess Svetlanka, needs my help." And he was losing time every second he stood still. Langlevitt peered down at Irina. "You will be quite safe here, Your Highness." Grey kissed his mother's cheek. "Do not let her out of your sight, mother." He turned back to Irina with a gentler tone. "Lady Dinsmore here will take lovely care of you, and cook." He pointed out Mrs. Braxton standing with the other servants. "Makes the best raspberry puddings in England." Seeing the tears brewing in her eyes, he bent to kiss the back of Irina's hand. "I swear on my life that I will bring your sister back to you." "And the little girl, too?" Grey froze. "Which little girl?" "In the carriage. They spoke of a child they had in London, a girl with blonde hair. It made Lana upset." She blinked and bit her lip, as if trying to recall exactly what was said. "The Baron said something about her looking like her father." Grey's blood turned to ice as her gaze fluttered to his hair. "Oh, no. Is it you?" He swallowed hard, his eyes going to his parents, who were both staring at him in stunned disbelief. "Yes, Sophia is my daughter." Lady Dinsmore let out a scream and promptly fainted. Grey's father caught her before she could crumple unceremoniously onto the foyer floor. Irina stared at him, wide-eyed with determination. "Then you must save her." Grey stood, forcing himself not to sprint to the stables. He met his father's eyes, which were looking at Grey with open shock. It was time he did the right thing for Sophia. The child was his, and everyone would know it. "You have a granddaughter, my lord," he said to his father with a soft, rueful smile. "I promise I will explain everything later, but I must go." Lord Dinsmore still crouched near the floor, supporting Grey's unconscious mother, and sealed his lips. He gave a short nod, and Grey and Langlevitt exited through the front door. They did not speak on the way to London, riding at a pace Grey normally would not have subjected his horses to, but lives were on the line. Lana's, Sophia's. Every moment lost was one closer to losing them. They stopped once to feed and water the horses, and even so they managed to reach London in short order. Dawn was just breaking over the inky sky, streaks of grey seeping through the darkness. The first stop was the Earl of Thorndale's home, where he'd sent his messenger. Sure enough, Thorn was in his stables readying mounts with the stable boys, his face grim. "Your message has barely preceded you north. I'd hoped you were jesting, but I've done as you asked. The agents from Bow Street should be here any minute." He squinted in the gloom. "Who do you have with you?" "No jest," Grey said, hoping to God the agents didn't tarry. "Morning, Thorn," Langlevitt said. It was all that was needed by way of introduction. Thorndale nodded a greeting and handed over the rest of his task to a waiting stable boy. "So is someone going to tell me what the devil is going on?" Grey explained in a few short sentences who Lana was and what had happened. To his credit, Thorndale didn't blink an eye at what Grey knew sounded like a ludicrous tale, and when the two agents arrived, their burly frames setting Grey at ease, Thorndale quickly repeated the specifics to them. The two men remained stern-faced, though their expressions grew agitated at the mention of Zakharov. "Aye, we've heard of this one," of them said. "Then this is your chance to get to know him better," Gray replied, accepting a fresh mount from one of the stable boys. Langlevitt did the same. "Lead the way," Thorndale said, mounting his own horse. As they left the stables, Gray was overwhelmed with gratitude at the man's unflinching help. "Thank you, Thorn." He merely nodded, and Gray knew he'd made the right choice in reaching out to him. The ride to the Stevens Hotel was quick, largely due to the empty roads given the early time of day. Most men were still tucked to bed, and the only ones on the streets were the young crossing sweepers, clearing horse manure and mud from the dusty streets. Dismounting, Gray strode into the foyer of the hotel, waking up a disgruntled and sleepy-eyed footman. "Is there a man called Baron Zakharov here?" he asked in a low tone. "Who's asking?" Gray's lips pinched tight, and the man paled visibly at the sight of the pistol appearing in Gray's palm. "He's not here, my lord, not since yesterday." His heart sinking in frustration, Gray went to the entrance where the others were waiting and scanned the street. Where else could they have gone? Had Lana been wrong in her assumption that they were going to the hotel? Hell, they could be anywhere. Gray couldn't help the panic gathering in the pit of his stomach as he met Langlevitt's eyes. He pounded the door jamb with a closed fist. "They're not here. What if we misjudged them and they are still in Essex?" "No, they are close," the Earl said. "Princess Irina mentioned they had your daughter in London." Gray could feel the weight of Thorn's stare at Langlevitt's careless statement, but explanations would have to wait. With a ragged breath, he calmed himself and considered what he knew of both men. If the Count had stayed hidden in London, chances are he would have wanted to be close to Zakharov. Walking back inside, he reached into his coat pocket and extracted a few coins. The silver riveted the footman's greedy gaze. "Where did he go when he stayed here? Did he visit any nearby lodgings?" "Mayhap across the street, my lord," the man said, reaching for the coins. "The Abigail, but I cannot be sure. There are many guests going back and forth." Back on the front steps, Gray took a look at the Abigail's stone facade. It was a more run-down place. One distinguished foreign dignitaries staying at the Stevens Hotel would likely visit for paid and private pleasures. Langlevitt nodded thoughtfully. "That would be a logical choice if the Count wanted to stay out of sight." "Especially if he wanted to keep an eye on Zakharov," Gray agreed. He met Thorn's determined look and flicked his gaze to the Bow Street agents. "You two can cover the front and the back. We may or may not have the advantage of surprise. Thorn, you stay in the rear. Langlevitt and I will go first. The safety of the princess and the child is our priority." Like the Stevens, the interior of the Abigail was hushed and quiet, though far less well-maintained. It stank of stale ale, cigar smoke, and the musk of other unmentionables. The thought that Lana and his daughter had been brought here made Gray's temper double in measure. He approached the dure-faced man at the rear of the room, watching their approach with ill-concealed rancour. Wasting no time, Gray displayed the pistol tucked into the waistband of his trousers. "There is a man staying here with a Russian accent. He would have arrived not long before now with a woman and a child. Where is he?" The man's eyes narrowed, clearly unimpressed by the threat of a weapon. Gray chose another avenue and thrust a fat velvet pouch across the counter. "First floor up," the man said, pocketing the pouch and disappearing behind a pair of faded curtains. "Last door." Gray and the two men made their way up the stairs, wincing at every creak and every groan of the wood beneath their feet. There was a chance that the man had lied, but as they drew near to the door in question, the soft, muffled sounds of a child crying caught Gray's attention. It hit him like a blow to the gut. He nodded tightly to Langlevitt, who took up position on the other side of the door with a gun in each hand, and Thorn, who retreated to the top of the stairs in case any of the Count's men came running at the sound of a commotion. With a sharp grunt, Gray kicked the door in. His eyes took in the relieving sight of Lana and Sophia huddled on a sofa in the far corner of the room, before falling on two figures standing at the centre, piling items into a trunk. "Don't move," Langlevitt ordered, levelling one of his pistols at the Count and the other at the unfamiliar man at his side. "I assure you that if you do, you will not draw a single breath more." "Norrie!" Sophia wailed at the sight of him, but Grey couldn't let himself become derailed by her cries, or by the sight of Lana with her arms curled protectively around his daughter. He frowned. "Where is Zakharov?" Neither of the men answered. "I won't ask again," Grey seethed, his pistol locking onto the Count's chest. "I am here." Grey inhaled a sharp breath as Zakharov materialized from behind the billowing drapes of the open windows behind the sofa, a pistol pointed at the back of Lana's head. His fingers wound into her hair, dragging her off the sofa and to his side. A whimpering Sophia followed, clutching at Lana's gown, unwilling to let her go. Lana's fierce gaze met Grey's, and he immediately understood what those blazing eyes conveyed. She would not give in without a fight. Grey was torn between admiring her courage and fearing for her life, but time was too short to dwell on either. He nodded imperceptibly. Feigning unsteadiness, Lana leaned heavily to one side, her body shielding Sophia's, as clumps of her silky hair were left behind in Zakharov's ruthless grip. The Baron was pulled off kilter by her deliberate fall, giving Grey the barest sliver of opportunity. But that was all he needed. He exhaled and fired, the shot blasting through the confines of the room and catching the Baron square in the chest. Thorne appeared in the doorway, his eyes concerned as he took in the scene and Zakharov's dead body. Langlevitt still had both his pistols on the other two men, who hadn't moved a muscle. The Count's face had gone white with shock and anger. "Fetch the runners," Grey told Thorne. "It's over." Thorne nodded, and Grey moved toward Lana and Sophia, wanting only to hold them, touch them, make certain neither of them had been injured. Are you both all right?" "We are now," Lana said, her tears breaking free as Sophia flung her little body into his arms. Grey dropped to his knees and kissed the child's head, the tension draining from his body. He'd just taken a man's life, but it was an act he felt no remorse over. He'd kill any man who threatened his daughter. As Thorne returned with the two Bow Street agents and set about securing the Count and the other man, Grey got back to his feet, keeping Sophia firmly tucked against him. He drank in the sight of the woman standing beside them. The thought of losing Lana and Sophia had been a sobering one, and even if he hadn't already made the decision to declare his fatherhood, there was nothing in the world that would stop him from doing it now. His eyes met Lana's, or from claiming the woman who had captured his heart. Maid or princess, it didn't matter. She was his. He almost smiled at the next thought that entered his head. If she would have him. In the eyes of society and the ton, Lana was more than his peer. She was royalty. And there was a very real possibility that she could refuse him, push him away again. Though he'd determined she had only done it that once to protect him, to be able to run from Zakharov if she needed to, he still wasn't completely certain. Grey supposed he could compromise her by taking her in his arms right then and there. Then again, Langlevitt currently held 2 pistols, and he'd made it more than clear that the matter of Grey's intentions had yet to be settled. Ravishing the love of his life would have to wait until they were in private. Lana blushed as if she could read his thoughts, and he wisely moved away from the bright source of his temptation. There was still the matter of the Count and his treachery. "This is an outrage," the Count postured, his eyes darting to Grey's as he approached. "You have murdered one of the Tsar's most trusted officers. You will rot in prison for such an unprovoked attack." "Unprovoked?" Langlevitt cleared his throat. "You kidnapped the child of an English lord. As peers of the realm, Thorndale and I will swear that Lord Northridge's shot was to protect his daughter." He smiled. "And I fear that it is you who will rot in prison, Count Volkonsky, for your assassination plot against the Tsar and the cold-blooded murders of Grand Duke Grigori and Grand Duchess Katerina." The Count laughed loudly as Langlevitt crouched to retrieve the papers from Zakharov's coat pocket. "What proof do you have? Letters to my French lover," he scoffed. "Those prove nothing." "On their own, you are correct," Gray interjected, his eyes flicking to Lana's and seeing the surprise there. He reached into his own pocket and produced the code breaker. "But with Grand Duke Grigori's key, you will have much to answer for." "Where did you get that?" Lana whispered. "Irina found it," Gray explained, "hidden behind your family portrait." Lana's uncle paled at the sight of the stiff parchment in his hand, his mouth thinning as Gray placed it upon the letters. Langlevitt scanned the documents using the code breaker and smiled grimly. "It's no small wonder you and Zakorov wanted these letters back in your possession. Not only do they confirm yours and the Baron's involvement in a plot against the Tsar, it also implicates both of you in the murder of your brother after he discovered your plans." The Count's furious gaze flew to his niece. "You bloody bitch!" Gray stepped forward, his fist cracking into the man's face like the strike of a snake. "You do not get to address her," he bit out savagely. "You do not get to so much as look at her. You murdered her parents, drove her from her home. She lowered herself to drudgery, to the life of a paltry servant to hide from you." He drew his arm back again, intent on pummeling him until his face was unrecognizable, but a light touch on his arm stalled him. "Stop, Gray," she said. "It's over now." He turned, drawing her into his arms, and, uncaring of his audience, buried his face in her hair. A small weight launched itself at their joined bodies, and Gray's arm curved down to hold Sophia close. Lana's lips touched his ear, her whisper for him alone. "And do not begrudge my time as a servant, my lord, for without it I never would have met you." Chapter 26. 6 weeks later, Lana watched Lord Langlevitt's face carefully as their carriage drew alongside the masses of others in the courtyard at Worthington Abbey. His eyes were troubled, his lips pressed thin. "You did not have to come," Lana said. Irina twisted from her rapt gaze out the window to stare up at her older sister. "Of course he did. It is a wedding ball." Leave it to Irina to correct her, Lana thought with an uncontainable grin. It wasn't just any wedding ball, either. It was Lady Briannon's and Lord Bradburn's. They had decided they couldn't live without each other after all. Lana was glad for the two of them, and she had never seen Bryn look so happy in the days that followed their second and final engagement. "And the Duke of Bradburn insisted upon Henry's attendance," Irina added. Lana glanced fondly at her sister. "You're right, of course." Having her sister back at her side and under the same roof for the last month had only underscored just how nervous Lana had felt with her being so far away, in some estate she had never set eyes upon. She had not even been able to properly picture her sister at the Earl's estate, she realized, and that had made Irina seem ever more distant. But now Irina was safe, as Lana had promised so many months before on the night they had fled Volkonsky Palace. She'd made a vow to win back everything they had lost, and finally it had come to be. Lana still couldn't quite believe it. Lord Langlevitt adjusted his cravat, even though it was already perfectly knotted. "Princess Irina is correct. Somewhat," he said with a jut of one brow. "I am not attending because His Grace insisted, but because, as your guardian, I could not have allowed the pair of you to attend alone." Lana had not objected to his proposal that he be their public guardian after the fiasco at the Abigail lodgings, though she knew it was mostly for show, and for Irina. They could not have remained at Ferndale, Lana's position as lady's maid now entirely unnecessary. Staying as honoured guests, as Lady Dinsmore had so warmly suggested, her cheeks still a brazen red from learning she had employed a princess, was also out of the question. Langlevitt had eyed Gray across the front sitting-room and jumped in to say guest rooms for the princesses were already being prepared at Heartstone. With the Countess en route to Essex, the princesses would be more than properly chaperoned. Before leaving Ferndale, Lana had gone to her room to gather the rest of her belongings, left behind when she and Irina had been taken. She'd stood in the small room and bade a silent farewell to the space that had kept her hidden safely for so long. She did not begrudge her time spent here. The last months had changed her. They had most certainly widened her view of the world, and the people living within it. Good, decent people, like Mrs. Braxton and Mary, Percy and James. Taking her valises, Lana had gone next to the kitchens, where she'd been greeted by alarmed expressions, hasty curtsies, and stiff bows. She had acknowledged their awkwardness with a warm smile as she'd directed herself toward the housekeeper's room. None of them had ever been rude or truly unkind to her. The only person undeserving of her forgiveness was Mrs. Frommer. She knocked upon the door, and then opened it before the woman could issue an invitation to do so. Mrs. Frommer did not appear as surprised as the other employees had, and stood slowly from where she'd been seated at her desk. It was almost as if she'd expected Lana to come. She closed the door behind her and set down her valise. "Mrs. Frommer, I think you understand why I am here," Lana said, her hands clasped before her, her chin held high. The housekeeper did not move, nor did she speak, though a sickly shade of yellow tinted her cheeks. The domineering woman was nervous, and for good reason. However, Lana took no pleasure in torturing her. She simply wanted to retrieve her property. "I suppose you now understand what a lowly servant was doing with such a fine piece of jewelry." Lana's voice was soft. "I should not have been made to come here and ask for its return." Mrs. Frommer took a breath, her lips pressing thin, and went to a cabinet beside her desk. She inserted one of the many keys upon her key-ring into a lock, twisted, and opened the door. When she turned back around, the diamond bracelet was in her palm. She came forward and dropped it into Lana's waiting hand, as if the jewels had been blazing hot. There was no hint of regret on her face, and her complete lack of remorse made Lana pause. "No apology, Mrs. Frommer, for accusing me of being a thief, for ransacking my room." As she stared at the woman, who had turned the last few weeks into a living purgatory, Lana felt only pity. It was sad that her life was so absent of joy that she took such pleasure in making others miserable. Lana picked up her valise and stood tall, looking at the housekeeper, who suddenly seemed about as fearsome as a soaked kitten. "I forgive you, Mrs. Frommer." Lana slipped the diamonds into her reticule as the housekeeper flinched and moved back behind her desk, still silent. "I can only hope that in future you will choose to be kinder to those who rank beneath you, that you do not use your power as a way to oppress and threaten." And with that, Lana had swept out of the housekeeper's office. Afterward, she and Irina had moved into the Earl's home, and had become celebrities practically overnight. No longer a servant, but the absolute story of the season. Not a scandal, but a sensation, or so Bryn had whispered to her in delight the last time Lana had paid a visit to Ferndale. And, needless to say, everyone who was anyone in the beau monde wanted to meet the mysterious Princess Svetlanka, who had been hunted by a traitor to the Tsar and driven into hiding, as a maid, of all things. They wanted to meet the woman Lord Northridge had been held at gunpoint, trying to protect, the one who had been vetted by two of the most respectable men of their set, Lords Langlevitt and Thorndale. The papers throughout London had run numerous stories and accounts of Baron Zakorov and Count Volkonsky's treachery, but it had been the scandal sheets with their opinion pieces on Lana and Irina that had stirred such fervour. But Lana had not been ready for any of it. The idea of such wild attention had made her ill with nerves. Bryn had claimed she and Irina were sensations, and the opinion pieces had only supported that. But what if the fickle ton changed their minds? What if she and Irina were met not with the kind curiosity the papers were printing, but with scorn? What if she was still an undesirable and socially impossible match for Grey? "We don't need to stay long," Lana said, as the driver stopped the horses and a footman swung the door open. She knew Langlevitt did not enjoy such crushes, and would have much rather been at home in his study. And though he had said next to nothing on the matter, the death of the Duke's sister, Lady Eloise, had definitely affected him. "Stay as long as you like, Princess. You needn't worry about me," he replied, as she took the footman's proffered hand. "Besides, I have a feeling you're going to fill your dance card within seconds of your arrival." Irina scooted forward on the bench. "And what of me?" Lana laughed and descended the steps. Once her sister had followed, she took in the sight of her and breathed out in relief that Lord Langlevitt was indeed their guardian. While Irina still had the stickish figure of a young girl, she had a countenance that would surely capture attention. "You should count yourself lucky. All other 14-year-olds are far too young to attend such a ball, but Her Grace Lady Bradburn insisted on your presence," Lana said. "You can be certain to have a full dance card this evening." It was something she knew her sister would revel in. "Will you dance with me, my lord?" Irina asked Langlevitt as he joined them. His discomfort seemed to increase as he considered his answer. "Irina, you must allow the gentleman to propose a dance," Lana said, laughing again. "Well, that seems a risk. What if the gentleman I wish to dance with doesn't ask?" This time it was Langlevitt who cracked a grin. "The lady has a point." He extended his right elbow to Irina and his left to Lana. "And I will certainly dance with you, though your toes may suffer for it." Lana doubted he was a horrid dancer, though he did move with definite stiffness. Whether it was his fine breeding, his serious nature, or some old wound, she didn't know. And as they entered Worthington Abbey, her nerves decided it didn't truly matter at the moment. The doormen took their wraps, and they were led toward the grand ballroom. The last time Lana had been at a ball, she had been a servant. She had been next to invisible. Now, as she walked the corridor, she saw as well as felt eyes falling upon her. The main crush would be in the ballroom, but there were plenty of guests and footmen moving through the halls, and the looks they cast Lana were of pure astonishment. At least, that is what they felt like. They did nothing to quell her nerves either. "They have been waiting for this for weeks," Langlevitt said. "For what?" she asked. "To see you." She and Irina had sequestered themselves at Heartstone, wanting only to be together after having been apart for so long. Not to mention that they had absolutely nothing to wear. Irina had taken one glance at Lana's lady's-maid dresses and had doubled over in laughter. So they had paid Madame Despins a visit, and she and her assistants had been flushed with excitement to be the shop that would outfit the remarkable and instantly popular Russian princesses. They remembered her from Briannon's visits, and Madame Despins had gone so far as to say that Lana had, in her opinion, carried herself suspiciously well for a lady's maid. Lana drew a sudden shaky breath as they arrived at the ballroom entrance. She did not know why she was so nervous. She'd been to hundreds of balls in St. Petersburg, but for some reason her knees wobbled beneath the voluminous skirts of the gorgeous sapphire satin gown that rippled like liquid every time she moved. Silver thread shimmered through the material whenever it caught the light, creating the illusion that the fabric had a life of its own. With a black lace overlay, the perfect foil for its vibrant colour, it was undeniably one of the loveliest gowns she had ever worn. Diamond earbobs and a stunning matching sapphire and diamond teardrop necklace glittered at her ears and throat, a gift from Countess Langlevitt. The crowning piece was the magnificent tiara that rested upon her upswept curls. Lana knew she looked the part, but deep down she felt like a sham, a fake. How could that be? For so long she had been pretending. She'd been slowly forgetting what it was to be a princess, and now that she was restored to her true position, even that didn't feel right. Her breaths shortened, and she grasped the Earl's fingers as their names were announced by Heed, the Duke's butler. "Lord Henry Radcliffe, the Earl of Langlevitt," he intoned. "Princess Svetlanka Volkonsky, Princess Irina Volkonsky." Conversation winked into silence as every eye in the ballroom turned to fix on them. She caught Briannon's startled smile and the austere but approving expression of her new husband at her side, but Lana was only looking for one person. Her heart felt as if it would burst as her eyes travelled the crowd, fluttering in her chest like a frightened bird. And then, as the trio descended the marble steps to the floor, she saw the object of her frazzled thoughts standing at the bottom, dressed in raven black from head to toe, except for the crisp white of his shirt and cravat. Grey made her breath catch. If she hadn't kept firm hold of the Earl's arm, she would have stumbled. Heat saturated every inch of her skin at the admiring look in those blue eyes. Eyes she had come to know so well. Eyes that had seen her in ways no one else ever had. As she reached him, everyone else ceased to exist, until Langlevitt's voice drifted in between them. "Lord Northridge," he said, a laughing note tinging his voice. "May I present Princess Svetlanka Volkonsky and her sister, Princess Irina Volkonsky." Grey first greeted Irina with a formal dip of his head and shoulders, and then winked surreptitiously at her, making her giggle. He then turned to Lana and took her hand. He bent over it and pressed his lips to the satin. Heat seared through her gloves, making her entire body burn. "Your Highness, it is a pleasure to meet so beautiful a princess." "Thank you, my lord," she said, flushing not from his praise, but from his utterly possessive expression and the seductive way his lips had framed the word pleasure. It reminded her of things she had no business thinking of right at that moment. "May I?" He extended his arm to act as her escort. Irina smiled up at her and remained at the Earl's side. Lana was acutely aware of Grey's body beside hers as they walked toward Briannon, her new husband, and their surrounding family and friends. Though he held himself rigid and proper, she also felt a yearning. From his body or her own, she wasn't entirely sure. She only knew that beneath those crisply starched clothes was warm skin, hard muscle, and a man that had held her in the most intimate of ways. She pushed the thoughts from her mind as Grey performed the introductions to the Duke and Duchess of Bradburn. Lana nearly laughed at the pretense, as if she hadn't existed before this moment, but it was the way of the haut ton. Men and women who came into fortunes and titles were greeted with pomp and circumstance, as if no one had known them before. "Congratulations, Your Grace," she said to the Duke before meeting the amused gaze of his bride. "Your Grace?" "Good heavens, Your Highness, so formal," Briannon teased, rolling her eyes and drawing Lana in for a very unladylike hug. Lana hugged her friend back, grateful that some things, like Bryn's unaffected warmth, hadn't changed. "Lord and Lady Dinsmore?" Langlevitt continued. Lady Dinsmore's complexion took on its customary hue whenever Lana was present. It reminded her of a newly ripened tomato. Despite Lana's protests that the Findlays had made her feel more like family than a servant, Lady Dinsmore couldn't seem to get past her mortification of having had a princess for a maid in her household. She'd apologized countless times, and, to Lana's relief, didn't have the chance to do so again now. The Earl's mother had moved forward for her proper introduction. "The Countess of Langlevitt," he said, and with a coy grin whispered, "Mother?" He bent to kiss his mother's cheek, and Irina, defying propriety, flung herself into the lady's arms. To Lana's surprise, the Countess only laughed and kissed her young ward on both cheeks, an adoring expression on her lined face. Irina had insisted that she and the Countess had grown quite close during their time together, and now Lana could see it was so. She hadn't thought it possible to be any more grateful to the Earl or his mother, but knowing Irina had been truly cared for, and not just a duty, brought a sheen of tears to Lana's eyes. She blinked them away as the introductions went on, the Earl leading her and Grey through the ballroom, announcing names and titles, most of which she already knew. Though it was exhausting, Lana bore it with as much grace as she could muster. Grey's firm arm beneath her fingers lent her strength. She couldn't help sneaking glances at his handsome profile as she and Irina were presented to those in attendance. She'd never imagined the day would come when she would be with him in public,
on his arm as if she had every right in the world to be there. It was unsettling and exhilarating.
"Lord Northridge,"
a woman said, bobbing into a curtsy, and as she rose Lana recognized her. It was Lady Cooper, and the smile she wore shone brighter as she looked at Lana.
"Miss Volchek, oh heavens, my apologies. Your Highness, of course."
"How wonderful to see you again, Lady Cooper." Lana took Lady Cooper's hand and gave it a reassuring squeeze. She had increased since the last time Lana had seen her. Lana felt something stir in her own belly, a phantom desire to one day look as radiant as Lady Cooper did. A tiny, secret, and completely irrational part of her had hoped that something would have come out of what had happened between her and Gray, despite his precautions. But her monthly flux had come and gone, and Lana's common sense had been returned to her. "Is Sophia in attendance, my lord?" Sir Cooper inquired as he joined his wife. "She is with her governess," Gray answered, and Lana caught his prideful grin. "In the refreshment room." Declaring Sophia's legitimacy as his daughter hadn't been as explosive as Gray had predicted. Perhaps it had been eclipsed by the 2 Russian princesses in hiding that had taken London by storm, or by Gray's own heroic role in rescuing them. Either way, Lana was grateful for Gray's sake. As she had anticipated, after the initial shock, Lady Dinsmore absolutely doted on the child. Sophia's laughter at Ferndale had been a welcome arrival in the wake of so much tragedy. Not just the culmination of what had occurred with her uncle, but also the death of the Duke's sister, Lady Eloise. Claiming a daughter was a much-needed ray of sunshine in a world so marked by cynicism and affectation. Although having little part in it, Lana couldn't help feeling pride for Gray's courage. Of course there were those who whispered of scandal Rhiannon had imparted to her earlier, but that was all they were, timid whispers.
"May we say hello?"
Lady Cooper asked. For a moment Gray seemed to become even more rigid than before. He took his arm from underneath Lana's, a gentle touch on her wrist, as if to tell her he would return shortly. He took Lady Cooper's gloved hands in his. "You need never ask for permission to see Sophia, my lady. You and Sir Cooper are our family, and always will be. I'm certain she will be delighted to see you both." Lady Cooper's eyes brimmed with tears, but she smiled and dipped into a short curtsy before they could fall. As the Coopers took their leave to visit the refreshment room, the strains of violins filled the ballroom. "That was kind of you," Lana said to Gray, grateful the guest's attention had started to transition away from she and Irina. Gray took up her arm again, fulfilling his silent promise to return. "Not at all. They are family. They raised my daughter for 3 years, and love her." "Not all men would think in such a way," she said, knowing he was not in any way like most of the other men in his sphere. He cut her a sly glance. "Are you finally admitting I am exceptional?" She sealed her lips and made a show of not hearing him. He laughed, but then quieted as the Duke led his radiant Duchess to the dance floor for the opening waltz. Lana's heart melted at the sight of them. "Bryn could not look more beautiful," she murmured. "Your Highness," Gray said, his voice husky instead of playful now. "May I have the honor of this dance?" Her eyes flicked to Langlevitt, who stood close by with Irina. He cleared his throat before escorting his young charge to the middle of the floor. Irina's expression was beatific. "I would love to, my lord," Lana replied. As Gray's hand slid around her waist, scorching through the layers of satin and drawing her close, Lana almost lost her footing. Almost. The joy of dancing, real dancing, made her feel buoyant with delight. "This is much better, don't you think?" Gray said, his eyes alight with mischief. "Dancing in a proper ballroom." "I don't know," Lana said, matching his playful gaze. "I rather enjoyed the thrill of dancing alone in a horse stall." He looked askance at her. "Thrill?" She leaned slightly closer and whispered, "The risk of discovery. Mrs. Frommer always searching for a reason to dismiss me. We did give her plenty of opportunity."
Something changed in Gray's expression. He started to glower. "Ah, yes, that horrible woman. I should tell you the news. She's been dismissed." Lana gasped and pulled back, her feet faltering. "What?" Gray tugged her back into place, closer against him, as he carried them both through the next few dance steps. "A footman found her stealing from the butler's pantry." She gasped again and accidentally stepped on Gray's foot. "Stealing?" They found a few other things in her room, small trinkets no one had bothered to miss, including a few pieces of Lady Dinsmore's jewellery, put aside from past seasons. Lana couldn't believe it. Why, that shameless hypocrite! Accusing her of stealing when she was off doing it for real. No wonder she'd seemed so unrepentant when she'd returned the bracelet. She was a hardened thief. Lana pursed her lips and frowned. Gray looked down at her, curious. "Have I upset you?" She recovered, shaking her head and trying not to smile. "Not at all. I do wish she'd been discovered earlier, of course." Lana considered a formal, suitable finish for her sentence, but it was not in her heart to do so. She grinned up at him. "If only to have given us a bit more privacy, that is. You see, I seem to have developed a distinct partiality for—" Her voice was a provocative caress against his ear. "Indecent outings in stables and gardens and gaming hells." At her words, the amusement fled from his eyes. They darkened with immediate passion, and Lana couldn't help reveling in her ability to affect him as profoundly as he did her. "Lana," he whispered in a strained voice, "do not say such things to me here in the middle of this room, when all it does is make me want to kiss you until you are breathless, and drag you off like a mindless brute to find a suitable linen closet." "Linen closet?" she asked, and then answered her own question at the hotly possessive look in his eyes. "Oh, it is what I wish to," she admitted with a fiery blush. Gray's fingers flexed compulsively on her waist as he led her through another turn, almost stumbling himself. She laughed, and he laughed too. Lana caught Bryn's delighted smile as she danced with her duke 2 couples away and grinned back. A few weeks ago she had never imagined she could be so happy. Her sister safe, their identities restored, and dancing so openly in the arms of a man she cherished beyond belief. Their bodies moved in perfect unison to the tune of a magic that belonged only to them. Ballroom or stable, it didn't matter, as long as she was in his arms and he in hers. Even if it were only this dance, she would safeguard it in her heart forever. "I have missed dancing," she said, her happiness suddenly tinged with melancholy as Gray twirled her expertly. "It was my favorite thing, and now it's my favorite thing to do with you." His breath skimmed her ear. "I would agree, but dancing is only my second favorite thing to do with you." The wicked timbre of his voice made every part of her body tingle. "And what's the first, my lord?" she asked with a smile, the edge of her sadness fading. "Gambling." His low answer was a caress, and as Lana lifted her burning gaze to his, the rest of the world seemed to fizzle away. The way Gray was looking at her, like she was the only thing worth seeing, eclipsed the playfulness of his words. The dancers blurred, the music dimmed, and it was only his strong arms anchoring her to him. She never wanted to be anywhere else, not for a single second. Her eyes drifted to her sister dancing with Lord Langlevitt, and she thought of Irina's earlier, innocent, childish comment about dancing partners. What if Gray did not know how she felt, at least now as Princess Svetlanka, enough for him to pose the question? What if he thought she was no longer within his reach, or worse, that she did not want him for more than what he had already given her? Attention and protection, and a handful of scattered, passionate interludes? She'd said such horrible things before, convinced him that she did not care, when the truth was the opposite. She drew a determined breath. "My lord, Lana." They'd spoken at the same time, and Lana lowered her eyes. "You first." Gray stopped then, right in the middle of the waltz and in the middle of the room. Lana could feel gazes flutter to them as other couples adjusted their pacing and movements to avoid a collision. It was unheard of to halt so suddenly, uncivilized. Then again, neither of them had ever been advocates of convention. The sound of her heartbeat rushed in her ears, like thunder, as the ball faded away. The only thing left was the man standing in front of her, his heart on his sleeve. "I wanted to wait," he whispered. "Court you properly as you deserve. But I cannot. I can't wait one more second to make you mine. Not for this waltz, not for this ball, not for this night." Gray's words were short, as if he couldn't formulate his thoughts properly, but she almost swooned at the look in his eyes as he drew one of her gloved hands to his lips. "Will you have me, love?" Lana couldn't breathe. Her chest felt full and yet empty at the same time. "Have you?" she repeated, confused and hopeful and terrified that he didn't mean what she wanted him to mean. "I want you as my wife, Lana." She found she still couldn't take a breath, but not because she was delirious with joy. Rather, she couldn't breathe because she was suddenly afraid, suddenly uncertain. She pulled her hand from his, and the sounds of the ballroom returned. "Why?" By the look in Gray's eyes, he hadn't expected the question any more than Lana had expected to pose it, but she needed to know. "Why?" he echoed. "Why do you want to marry me? Because I am a princess now." Hurt replaced his confused expression, and she realized how harsh she had sounded. Lana rushed to explain. "Before, when I was nothing more than a maid—" "I loved you," he interrupted, louder than perhaps he'd intended. The words reached a few of the closest dancers twirling around them, drawing their shocked glances. "When you chastised me for endangering Bryn's health, I loved you. When you refused to tell me the truth about who you were, I loved you. When I saw you tend to Sophia through her illness, I loved you." He reclaimed her hand and pressed it against the lapel of his jacket, over his heart. "I won't lie. My plan to take you as my wife is going to be a hell of a lot easier now than it was before, when I'd determined to marry my sister's stubborn maid, claim my illegitimate child, find my love's lost sister, and take you all somewhere, anywhere we could live together in peace." He took a breath, and finally, so did Lana. With it came a stone of emotion lodged right in the center of her throat. "You were going to do that," she whispered. "Leave your family." "I was going to do whatever I had to in order to be with you," he answered, and she saw that for him the rest of the ballroom was still invisible. "And Irina?" He smiled, his blue eyes intense. "I come with a daughter, you come with a sister. Such a thing could not please me more." "Oh, Gray!" Her own eyes filled with tears. Gray sank down onto one knee right there in the center of the dance floor, and the couples waltzing around them all tripped to a halt and stared openly. "Lana," he started, and then with a halting smile finished. "That is, Princess Svetlanka Volkonsky. Will you be my wife?" There it was, the question she'd been desperate for, longed for. Lana's answer was already at the tip of her lips, pushed there by the blissful throb of her heart. "I am yours." Chapter 27. The hour was late as Lana's betrothed escorted her to Heartstone after many more dances and congratulatory toasts at the ball. Briannon, soon to be Lana's sister-in-law, had been beside herself with joy. She'd witnessed her brother's public proposal from where she'd stood on the dance floor and had rushed to embrace both of them, while the rest of the guests had clapped and cheered in utter astonishment. Only a handful of the oldest and most stringent tut-tutting at the overt show of emotion. Lady Dinsmore had been heartily congratulated for having pulled off 2 of the most brilliant matches that the ton had seen in recent years, which made Lana smile and Gray roll his eyes. But the most heartwarming had been Sophia's reaction when her governess had brought her into the ballroom to bid Gray good night. He'd lifted her into his arms and told the little girl that Lana had just agreed to marry him. "Will you be my maman now?" she'd asked shyly. Lana had felt as if her chest would not be able to contain her love. "Yes, if you'll have me. Can we have jam sandwiches with cream?" She had laughed her answer through her tears. "Of course, sweetheart, anything you like." After so many months of uncertainty, Lana felt consumed by happiness. She and her sister were safe, and the man she loved had asked her to become his wife. She was still walking on air as Gray led her up the stone steps to the manor. He bowed low, his mouth brushing her knuckles. "I shall pine away the hours until I see you again, my lovely bride-to-be." Lana blushed, basking in the warmth of his gaze. She glanced up at the blanket of stars in the inky velvet sky. "I must admit that I am not quite ready to retire. Shall we indulge ourselves with a midnight stroll, then?" "It is a lovely evening," she agreed. The June air was balmy against her skin, and a stroll in the Earl's gardens sounded too romantic for words. And the plain truth was, she wanted to extend their magical night for as long as possible. They walked in silence, the pathways lit by the brilliant light of the moon riding high in the sky. All the flowers and leaves were gilded in silver, lending a mystical air to the gardens. After a while of strolling hand in hand, they chanced upon the start of a maze in the centre of the lush gardens. "Oh, lovely!" Lana exclaimed, staring at the immaculately groomed hedges looming above them. "It's like the one we have at Volkonsky Palace. When we were children, Irina and I would get lost for hours in it. There was a fountain in the centre of ours." "Since it appears that you are a maze expert, I shall give you a 5-minute head start," Gray said with a playful wink. As she turned to leave, he pulled her toward him, making her gasp at the feel of his hard body pressed against hers. "But first, we must discuss terms." She licked her lips. "Terms? For the winner?" Her limbs turned useless at the thought of their last bet at the Cock and the Crown. A muscle worked in his cheek at the memories that were obviously tormenting him as well. "A kiss, perhaps," he suggested. Wrapping her arms around his neck, Lana pressed her mouth to his, her tongue darting in for one swift taste before retreating. "I have a better idea for the winner's prize." Gray's eyes widened in surprise, but she slid out of his grasp and disappeared around the first bend of the maze. "But you must be swift, Lord Northridge." "Lana!" he growled in amused frustration. "You promised 5 minutes, my lord," she sang over her shoulder as she came to another opening. It didn't take her long to work out the maze. Every maze had its own mathematical pattern, and this one seemed to be every third left and every second right. Lana smiled to herself as she peeled the glove from her left arm and left it in the pathway. A few paces later, she dropped to the second. Her entire body was tingling with anticipation as she left her slippers behind, and then, at later intervals, each of her stockings. She knew it was utterly scandalous, but she didn't care. She felt free and unfettered, the cool, smooth stones under her feet exhilarating. The sublime glow of moonlight and the enchanted nature of the maze made her feel like a woodland sprite. It was an ethereal landscape, one that filled her mind with indecent fantasies. A laughing gasp froze on her lips as she came to the centre of the maze. It wasn't a fountain like the one at Volkonsky Palace or some Greek statue. Instead, the jewel of this maze was a gorgeous, stained-glass greenhouse. She pushed open the door and smiled in delight. A circular cushioned bench dominated its centre, while fragrant miniature roses of every hue ran its circumference. She was so spellbound at the whimsical sight that she didn't hear Gray until his arms slid around her waist from behind, his lips nibbling at her ear. "You are a minx," he murmured, her discarded items of clothing falling to the floor. Lana turned in his arms. "Have you ever seen anything so beautiful?" "Yes." It was clear he wasn't referring to the greenhouse, and she blushed. His fingers caressed the sensitive skin inside her elbows, with grazing touches that left tingles in their wake. Gray's gaze slid to the tips of her bare feet, peeping from the hem of her dress. "My barefoot princess," he whispered, before his lips claimed hers in a tender kiss. Lana pulled away before the kiss evolved into something more urgent. "Gray," she asked, her voice trembling, "would you have truly wanted to marry me if I were still a maid?" "I would have wanted you if you were an urchin on the street without a farthing to your name," he breathed. "You belong with me, Lana. I think I knew it when you gave me that dressing down in the kitchen stairwell without a care for my station, just to protect my sister. I knew I had to have you, especially after that morning you were in my carriage along Ferndale's Drive. Do you remember? You asked me if I liked what I saw." His smile turned wolfish. "I did, very much." She bit her bottom lip. "That was bold of me. I love it when you're bold." His thumb slid over her lower lip, freeing it from where her teeth had it pinned. "I love everything about you." "You do?" she asked, her voice thin with sudden nerves. Her feet were cold against the slate floor, but that wasn't why she'd started to shiver. Gray's palms cupped her cheeks. "My sweet love, you have had my heart in your keeping for months." He drew his mouth down to hers, and Lana's lips parted, welcoming the hot sweep of his tongue. He lifted her in a smooth motion, kicking the door shut with his heel and walking toward the center of the greenhouse. He set her on the round bench, the cushion soft beneath her. He remained standing, gazing down at her. The moonlight caught the segments of jeweled glass and lit the inside of the greenhouse, as well as the two of them, in a kaleidoscope of colors. Gray turned to look at the small pile of her things he'd left on the floor near the greenhouse door. Her slippers lay underneath her silk stockings and gloves. "Eager, are we?" he asked, his attention coming back to her. Lana drew her chilled feet up onto the cushion and felt the softness of her calves rubbing together under her gown. She flushed at her own audacity. "Call it incentive, my lord." He lowered his chin and deepened his stare, the bright blue of his eyes a radiant ice color in the jeweled light. "You know I enjoy it when you are bold, but what I want to know," he said, one of his knees sinking onto the cushion beside her, "is if you enjoy it when I am." Leaning onto her elbows, Lana lifted her eyes and stared up at him. "How bold might that be?" "Bold enough to tell you exactly what I want." She felt an extra throb of her heart and a responding flutter of her pulse in her neck. "And what do you want?" Gray gripped Lana's hips and with one swift motion rolled her onto her stomach. "Oof!" she let out, and tried to push up onto her elbows. He'd climbed higher, bracketing her upper legs and pinning her into place. "What are you doing?" "I am planning a letter to Madame Despins, in which I tell her to never design another dress for you that has laces up the back." She felt him tugging at the intricately laced satin ribbon that wove up the back of her dress. "Gray!" "I told you I could not wait to make you mine," he said. Her bodice became looser as he spoke, her front still pressed into the cushion of the bench. "But we are in Lord Langlevitt's greenhouse, and I am already yours. We are betrothed." "I now mean to make you mine in an entirely more carnal way." She gaped at the creamy white cushion beneath her, her body igniting to flame at the mere spark of his words. Of course he had already done so, at the Cock and the Crown, and it would be a lie to say she had not dreamed of being underneath him again and again. But the Earl could return to Heartstone at any time, and Irina. She had begged to stay at the ball to fulfill her dance card completely and perhaps have a little more cake, but Henry was no doubt growing restless, the Countess as well. "We cannot," she whispered, as if someone might already be lurking just beyond the stained glass exterior. He slowed his tugging, but after a moment, Lana realized it wasn't because he was in agreement. Gray opened her bodice, the cool air touching her bare upper back. A pair of warm lips followed. They were light, delicate nudges, but to her astonishment, each one elicited a reaction within her as deep and resonant as the strike of a bell. She gasped at the familiar prickles of desire between her legs. He lifted his lips from her skin just long enough to murmur, "I want to strip this gorgeous gown from your body and lay you out before me." Lana closed her eyes, allowing him to gently free each of her arms from their cap sleeves. She then stretched her bared arms before her and clutched the edge of the bench. Gray began to pull at the unlaced bodice and stays. The layers slipped down her body, and she felt him shifting side to side to allow the voluminous skirts to ripple down onto the floor. Within moments she was in her chemise and drawers, his knees still caging her legs. "I want to see every inch of your delectable skin," he said, his breath hot against the low-backed cotton chemise. Lana shivered and felt his fingers pushing the cotton up over her head, his body reaching to pull the fabric from her arms. "I want to taste every part of you," he said, and Lana's eyes snapped open. "What?" she asked, her throat barely able to make sound. Gray slid one palm in between her body and the cushion and filled it with her breast. He kneaded her gently, and Lana tried once more to rise onto her elbows. She gasped, her other breast yearning for attention. But his free hand had travelled southward, to the final article of clothing she wore. His fingers dipped underneath the waistband of her drawers. "I'm telling you what I want," he replied, lowering himself until she felt his weight against her back. He took her earlobe between his teeth and pushed the fabric down, exposing her backside. She swallowed a moan as his hand cupped one of her rounded cheeks. "And what I want is for you to say yes," he said, his tongue swirling behind her ear. Distracted by his caresses, she murmured, "I've already said yes." "You said yes to being my wife," he corrected, her drawers now around her knees. Gray's hands caressed her from shoulder to thigh, his lips and teeth kissing and nipping her back in their wake. Lana wanted to turn over and wrap her arms and legs around him, pull him into her, and feel every sublime sensation she had on that purple velvet sofa at the Cock and the Crown. "I want you to say yes to the things I've enumerated right here," he said, "right now. To see every inch of her, to taste every inch of her." Heat swamped her, her brain going utterly useless. What normal-blooded woman in her right mind would say no to the thoroughly wicked things this man was offering? She felt his lips trailing down the curve of her lower back, and then along the rise of her buttock, and promptly lost any and all care for where they were and who might chance upon them. She could not tell him to stop, not now, not when the hot, sweet ache in her core demanded otherwise. "Yes," she admitted, blushing fiercely. "I want what you want." His tongue stalled out on her rump, and she felt his smile against her skin. "Yes, you do." The drawers sailed from her legs, and with one more roll Gray had her on her back. The cool greenhouse air hit her breasts, and they tightened, goose-flesh firing up and down her arms and legs. Parts of her had been exposed to Gray before, but never all of her. And he'd never stood back the way he was right then, and stared at her with such intrepid ardor. Lana felt the urge to cover herself, but she knew he would only coax her hands away. Besides, he liked it when she was bold, and so she lifted her chin and allowed his eyes to roam. A knowing grin pulled the corner of his mouth, and he lowered himself slowly in front of the bench. Lana tried to sit up, but he made a sound to stop her. "But what are you— Oh, Gray." He'd run his hands up her inner thighs and nudged them apart, and slid her closer to the edge of the cushion. He kissed the inside of one thigh. "I said I want to taste every inch of you," he murmured, kneading the sides of her stiffened limbs and moving forward until his lips were at her apex. She went rigid with wild alarm at his warm breath fanning against her most private place. He couldn't possibly mean what she thought he meant. "But I— Want me to? Yes, I know. I'm so glad we agree on this." Before she could say another word, Lana felt one of his fingers enter her. She tensed, closing tightly around him and promptly losing all powers of speech or protest. "Relax, my love," Gray whispered. "I promise you nothing but pleasure." She had no doubt of Gray's skill or what he could give her, but the very picture of them in the greenhouse, with her splayed on the cushioned bench, completely nude, his hands and mouth fulfilling those indecent promises, it should have made her worry. It should have shocked her. Instead, something else took her utterly by surprise, a sweep of pure, unadulterated lust. Lana released the muscles in her legs and moaned as Gray stroked in and out of her. Sighing with pleasure, she stared at the stained glass ceiling, bathed in the moonlight filtering through, and matched his rhythmic plunges with her hips. When he removed his finger, she whimpered, and then gasped loudly as something warm and wet replaced it. Lana arched her spine and dug her fingers into the cushion as Gray plunged his tongue into her core. She held her breath as he took long, deep licks, doing exactly as he'd intended, tasting her, devouring her. Lana had never felt anything so divine, or as wicked. The wanton position, the sinful feel of his velvet tongue, and the return of his finger had Lana gasping for air. She cried out as pleasure built in swelling ripples, only knowing that the reward was there, right beyond her grasp, and she needed it. She worked her fingers into Gray's hair and held on, her body quivering and pulsing as each dive of his tongue, every teasing scrape of his teeth, pushed her toward the nameless, shapeless thing she craved. And then she caught it, a trembling heat consuming her from the very center of her body. Lana cried out again and again, embracing the heat as it started to flow away from her. And with it went her inexplicable yearning. Her muscles were slack, her fingers no longer tangled in Gray's hair. He lifted himself from her and kissed his way up her stomach, to her breasts, where he took a protracted moment to swirl his hot, talented tongue around each nipple. "Gray," she sighed, unable to think, unable to say anything more than that. "Did you enjoy giving me what I wanted?" he asked, a teasing lilt to his voice. It had felt more like Gray giving her something, but she couldn't do more than nod and smile. He pulled back, standing once more beside the bench. Lana watched him through heavily lidded eyes as he stripped out of his jacket and began to unbutton his waistcoat. Somewhere, somehow, he'd already rid himself of his cravat. "You cannot be serious," she whispered, beginning to rouse from the seductive web he'd woven around them. "What if we are discovered?" Sobering, Lana immediately began to consider possible scenarios. Henry, Irina, and the Countess returning to Heartstone to be informed by the butler that no, Princess Svetlanka had not arrived home on her newly betrothed's arm. The Earl taking to the lawns in search of them, his eyes catching on the entrance to the maze. And then Gray pulled his shirt off in one overhead tug, and Lana stopped worrying, stopped thinking, stopped breathing. He was beautiful. The muscles of his chest and shoulders were broad and able, tapering into a narrow, sculpted torso that made her mouth go dry. "Then I suppose we will simply have to marry," he replied, releasing the fall of his trousers and shucking off those next. With them went his smalls, and Lana shot to her elbows, her eyes riveted on his— Oh, sweet heavens! She knew that part of him had already claimed her once before, and had seen his impressive length between their bodies, but she had not viewed it like this. "I think it only fair. I did get to see every inch of you, did I not?" he said, that teasing grin of his falling back into place. "Gray, you're—" She didn't know how to finish without sounding absurd. Perfect, manly, breathtaking. He crawled onto the bench and hovered over her. "Exactly where I want to be for the rest of my life." She smiled up at him, suddenly giddy. "In Lord Langlevitt's greenhouse." He remained sober, however, and she blinked in surprise at his seriousness. "With you, Lana, it doesn't matter where I am, so long as we're together, like this." Gray touched her, his palms coursing down her body, his serious gaze admiring her figure the way someone might admire a sculpture. "You are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen." Lana knew it couldn't be true. She had seen a number of women more beautiful than she at the ball tonight, and many times before. But whether it was factual or not, in that moment, Gray was being honest. He thought she was beautiful. He wanted her. He loved her. And she realized then that she had not yet told him how she felt, that she loved him too. She loved him more than she'd ever imagined possible. "I want one more thing," he said before she could speak. Maybe it was for the best. They were important words, and she wanted to say them when the timing was right. "Yes?" she asked, half paying attention and half ogling the swollen length between his legs. Gray didn't answer with words. Instead, he scooped his hands below her back and moved her again, this time on top of him, as he settled beneath her. He reclined on the cushion and positioned her legs so that she was straddling him. Her hair was somehow still swept up in pins, except for a few tousled strands. She pushed them back, out of her eyes. "I want to watch you come for me again, this way," he said, his voice husky. Lana went still, her heart skipping a beat and then throbbing hard to catch up. She peered down at him, apprehension filling her. He wanted her to take control, and her immediate reaction was to say she couldn't, that she didn't know how. But then she remembered that, with every encounter she'd had with Gray so far, he'd shown her how to find pleasure and how to give him the same thing. Each time her body had learned, and swiftly. Lana gathered the boldness she now knew he adored and shifted to put him at her entrance. "Take your time, my love. I know your body is still new to—" Lana rocked against him, feeling the smooth crown of his shaft nudging into her. Gray's sentence cut off with a groan at the intimate clutch of her body upon him, and he gripped her hips, his own rising in a thrust. She bit her lip as she met him halfway with an indelicate gasp, before fully seating herself and allowing her inner muscles to adjust to his girth. And then what had felt like a foreign body invading her began to feel like an extension of her own. She rocked forward again, the slick friction of their joining spiking her desire. With every decadent roll of her hips, Gray met her with a thrust, and soon their bodies were moving in a rhythm that made her breathless. "Lana," he said, his own breath coming short. "Open your eyes. Look at me, love." She hadn't realized how tightly shut her eyes had been until he bid her open them. When she did, the sight of his naked body underneath hers, of his dark, passion-filled eyes, made her feel a kind of power she had never experienced before. She was a princess, but she felt like a goddess. He belonged to her, and she to him, and she wanted to stay this way forever. Maneuvering her legs around his hips, Gray sat forward and braced her back, giving her the freedom to lean back a little onto her arms. She didn't break her rhythm or eye contact, and the change in positioning seemed to open something else up inside of her. An untethered euphoria swept from her core to the ends of her limbs, and as Gray's thrusts began to intensify, she knew he was feeling the same frenzied rush, that he was nearly to the edge of his own ecstasy. He kept his eyes firmly hinged on hers, and Lana became as intent to watch his pleasure break through him as he was to watch hers. She could barely breathe, much less form actual words, but she had to tell him, now. "I love you," she rasped. "I love you so much, Gray." His eyes flared in immediate response, every muscle in his body tightening, as if her declaration was the very thing to send him hurtling over the edge. Gray's fingers dug into her behind, urging her onto his length harder and faster than before, his only answer a grunt of pure satisfaction. With one tremendous surge he groaned his release, fastening his hips to hers. Within seconds she cried out, her inner passage convulsing around him as he continued to grind against her, their bodies cradled in intimate bliss. She clutched at him, wanting to stay in this moment, wanting only to prolong the last pulses of pleasure shuddering between them. For a minute, Gray simply held her, their damp bodies still joined. He tried to even his breathing, and she did the same, her chest heaving. Gray leaned forward and nuzzled her breasts, his lips then tracing just underneath the glittering necklace she'd forgotten all about, resting along her collarbone. "Say it again," he said. Lana tried to clear her head and determine what he meant, but then she remembered. "I love you." He stayed rooted within her, and she realized then that he'd spilled his seed inside of her. He hadn't pulled free at the last moment to avoid unwanted consequences, because whatever child they created together would never be unwanted, or a mistake. Gray was going to be her husband, and she his wife, the mother of his children. He kissed her lips, though softly, unlike before. This was the kind of kiss that seemed to say they had plenty of time for other kisses. "And I love you," he said, then heaved an affected sigh. "Though I do think one of these times I should get you into a real bed before defiling your luscious body." She pressed her lips to his neck. "And why would you want to do that, my lord? It seems like a more proper place for a man to ravish his wife." Lana licked his earlobe and felt the responding rise of gooseflesh over his shoulders, where she'd wrapped her arms. "I think I prefer the inappropriate places more." He captured her mouth with a less chaste kiss this time. "I'll take that as a challenge, Your Highness. Prepare yourself." Lana laughed and kissed him again, quite certain that when it came to Gray, she would never be fully prepared, and she could not dream of having it any other way. Epilogue. St. Petersburg, Russia, October 1819. Gray glanced at Lana sitting opposite him in the carriage, cradling their 8-month-old son to her breast on one side and a sleeping 5-year-old Sophia on the other. Now, finally on their way to Volkonsky Palace, their first visit there as a family, he felt a fullness rise in his chest. Sometimes he still couldn't fathom that Lana was actually his, that she had married him, accepted his daughter, borne him a son. Some days he half expected to awaken one morning to see everything had disappeared, as if part of some imagined fantasy. But it never did, and Gray had never been happier. Experiencing St. Petersburg through his wife's eyes was like nothing Gray had ever imagined. Widely travelled, he had seen all manner of stunning architecture and breathtaking cathedrals across the continent. But Lana's natural exuberance and pride for her home transformed the visit into something magical. Whether it was her love for her city, or the fact that she brought new light to anything they shared, Gray was in awe. He viewed the magnificent winter palace with fresh eyes, listening to her riveting accounts of the sumptuous balls she'd attended there with her parents. They visited the abandoned Mikhailovsky castle together, and she regaled him with tales her father had told her of when Emperor Paul had lived there and was assassinated 16 years before. Her anecdotal stories made the old city come alive. Prior to their wedding in London, Lana and Irina had taken several trips back to Russia with the Earl of Langlevitt to ensure that things were running smoothly at Volkonsky Palace. But Gray had remained in London to tend to his affairs. Lana's uncle was stripped of his title, along with his guardianship of his brother's daughters. Alexander, the Tsar himself, had attended their nuptials, causing quite a stir in London with his unplanned arrival, and had expressed his gratitude to both princesses, as well as to Lord Langlevitt and Gray, for their assistance in unearthing the plot and the 2 traitors. The honour of Alexander's presence was noted by many in attendance, adding to Gray and Lana's startling rise in popularity among the ton, which of course meant little to either of them. After their wedding, though Lana's visits to her ancestral home had grown shorter, Irina's had not, and on the last trip they took together,
Irina had decided to stay in St. Petersburg for an extended period. Her absence had been tough on Lana, but Lana understood that her somewhat impetuous sister needed to find her own way. The Earl of Langlevitt had secured a suitable chaperone who had met with Lana's approval. Gray knew that Lana was looking forward to a long-overdue reunion with her younger sister at Volkonsky Palace. Across from him in the coach, Lord Oliver Gregory Findlay cooed contentedly, snug in the capable arms of his mother. Although Lana had agreed to the occasional assistance of a night nurse, she adored taking care of their young son. As Gray watched her, his hooded gaze falling to her lush body, he felt something stir in his loins. Motherhood suited her, and his passion for her had not diminished in the least. Neither had hers, thankfully. His thoughts wandered to a few hours earlier, when she had screamed his name, her body arching beneath his as he brought her to fulfillment. He could never get enough of her, it seemed, and the ripe changes of motherhood had made her delectable body even more luscious, more irresistible. She drove him mad, and right then his desire for her drummed through him. He resettled himself in his seat, trying to think of something other than ravaging every inch of his radiant wife with his mouth. But it was an uphill battle. Lana's laughing eyes met his, as if she could read his thoughts, and he arched a lazy eyebrow in response. "That, my lord, is the reason I am with child yet again," she said softly. "I cannot help it if you wish to seduce me at every turn." Her low laughter filled the interior of the carriage. "Well, if that is your stance, I shall endeavour to be less bold in the future." She paused, licking her lips and drawing his attention there. All attempt at controlling himself went out the window as the blood rushed to his nether regions, making him grimace. Her smile turned coy. "Which will be a pity, as there are so many inappropriate places to discover at Volkonsky Palace." "Don't you dare," Gray growled with a laugh, taking her meaning and growing stiffer. He groaned and adjusted his position, fervently wishing that they'd let the children ride in the other carriage with the nurse and the governess. He'd have had his sweet wife's skirts over her head before she could blink. "And for the love of all things holy, can we talk about something else before I embarrass myself?" Thankfully, she took pity on him. "I'm so looking forward to you seeing my home." "I am too. We're almost there," she said, leaning forward, her eyes lighting. "It's just beyond those hills. That's the village, and the old church." Desperate for any distraction, he peered obediently out the window, feeling his baser urges lessen at the sight of the picturesque landscape. It reminded him somewhat of Essex, although there were many differences. "Look now, just past this bend." Lana's voice hummed with excitement as they neared Volkonsky Park, which she'd told him surrounded the palace. But nothing had prepared him for the sight that greeted him as the carriage crested the hill, not Lana's stories or Langlevitt's curt descriptions. The glittering curve of the Slavyanka River caught his attention first, and then his gaze lifted to the lush landscape, crowned by a sprawling castle at least 5 times the size of Ferndale's manor house, resting like a jewel at the peak of a second rolling hill. He admired the long, sweeping lines of the architecture and the elegant neoclassical mix of Greek and Roman influences. His eyes drank in the aesthetically pleasing landscape park surrounding them, dotted with manicured gardens, shimmering lily ponds, and marble pavilions. "What do you think?" Lana asked softly, watching him. "It's beautiful, but I did not expect anything less." The carriage ambled up the road and rolled to a stop in the courtyard, giving in to a flurry of activity as servants bustled out to welcome them, and the nurse came to take both still drowsy children. But before Gray could descend to help Lana down from the carriage, she barred his way and closed the door. "What are you doing?" Lana moved to ensconce herself in his lap. "Before we go, there's one thing I wish to tell you." "And what is that?" Gray said huskily, the firm press of her bottom against his thighs inflaming his senses. He nibbled her ear and dragged slow kisses along her jaw. "Do you remember the maze I told you about?
Her voice shook as he kissed the corner of her mouth. "Yes? You recall what I told you lay at its center? A fountain. Why?" His wicked wife raised a laughing gaze to him. "You should know that I used to sneak away to swim in there at night." She kissed him, her teasing tongue coaxing his to action. "Naked," she whispered into his mouth. "Lana," he groaned. The combination of the erotic kiss and the thought of her frolicking like a water sprite beneath the spray of a fountain filling his brain with wanton desires. "I will not be responsible for what your servants think when I toss you over my shoulders and sprint for said labyrinth." "My servants have learned to turn a blind eye to my antics." "In that case," he moved to the edge of the bench, gathering her into his arms with an evil grin. "What are we waiting for?" "That depends on how much you love me." It was all in play, of course. Gray would never embarrass her, even if her servants were used to their mistress's eccentricities. And there would be more than enough time for games later, in private. Either in said fountain or behind closed doors. It did not matter which, as long as she lay, satiated, in his arms. He stared down at the woman who held his heart, the love of his life and the mother of his children, and wondered for the 100th time how they'd managed to avert disaster at almost every turn. Their love had not been easily won, but now here they were, together, with a chance at true happiness. He would not waste a second of it. Gray looked into his wife's eyes, his voice solemn as the day he'd given her his vows. "I will love you to my last breath, my darling." This concludes My Darling, My Disaster by Amalie Howard and Angie Morgan. Narrated by Paul Woodson, a member of SAG-AFTRA. Copyright 2017 by Amalie Howard and Angie Fraser. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement within Tangled Publishing, care of Alliance Rights Agency, LLC, and was produced in the year 2021 by Tantor Media Incorporated, a division of Recorded Books, which holds the copyright thereto. Please visit tantor.com for more information on our growing library of unabridged audiobooks.